Chapter 196. Tobacco and alcohol were inseparable, men and women were inseparable, and naturally, weapons and arrows were inseparable. Holding the heavy talisman arrows, Ning Ke beamed with joy. Sixth brother walked out of the iron forging room with a long cloth bag. He opened the bag and revealed 3 padeos inside. These were the 3 swords that Ning Ke had sent to the back mountain a few days ago. After being hammered and tempered by sixth brother, the blades looked more slender than before, and the long black hilts looked more solid. The slightly dark surface reflected the morning light, and occasionally a few simple and clear talisman lines could be seen. They looked a little delicate, but also full of endless murderous aura. Second brother said, "The West Hill Divine Palace has issued an edict. There should be a lot of young masters from various countries going to the wilderness this time. I think the judicial department will also send people there. Maybe you will meet Long Qing again in the north of Yen Kingdom." Hearing Long Qing's name, Ning Ke's scalp tightened involuntarily. He subconsciously had a strong thought of disappearing. He had defeated Prince Long Qing once in climbing the mountain, but the real gap between their cultivation states was too big. If Prince Long Qing bore a grudge against the 2 previous humiliations, he would probably suffer a lot in the hands of Prince Long Qing. "I won't see you off tomorrow. I just want to remind you," second brother continued, "you will be leading the students of the academy to the wilderness this time, representing the senior brothers and sisters of the second floor. You will be carrying the banner of the headmaster. So no matter what happens, you cannot disgrace the academy. The Revelation Institute of West Hill, the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, and the White Tower Temple of Yueluan. The disciples of the academy have had a lot of contact with these guys in the past. They have never lost in chess or musical performances. You cannot lose either." "Why are we not allowed to lose?" "Not bad. What if I can't beat him? I can't lose face even if I can't win." Ning Ke scratched his head and asked in confusion and distress, "Second brother, how can I not lose face if I can't beat him?" Second brother raised his eyebrows slightly and reprimanded unhappily, "If you can't win, you have to find a way to win. If you really can't win, you can't admit defeat. You have to find a way to escape. After cultivating for a few years, you can go back and fight with your opponent again. Do you think you can never win?" Because of His Majesty's suggestion, the Academy's students would be practicing in the wilderness of the north of Yen Kingdom this year, and the departure time was tomorrow. When Ning Ke walked out of the thick fog at the back of the mountain of the Academy, the serious voices of instructors were echoing in the study rooms around the stone ground. Outside the warehouse, there were stewards carrying out the things needed for the journey, and the stewards of the military ministry were counting the number of weapons. Walking out of the stone gate of the academy, he saw dozens of horses scattered on the green meadow under the morning light. These horses from the horse farm in the west of the city were calmly grazing with their heads lowered. Occasionally, they would bump into the flowers in the depths of the meadow and knock down the autumn petals. Ning Ke looked at the war horses that were about to embark on their journey and smiled. He apologized to the coachman, old Duan, who had been waiting outside the courtyard for a whole night, and was ready to board the carriage to return to the city. At this moment, he suddenly thought of a problem. He frowned and jumped off the carriage. He walked back to the academy's warehouse and borrowed a sturdy leather bag. He picked up dozens of heavy stones and stuffed them into the bag. After weighing the stones in his hand, he felt that the weight of the stones in the bag was about the same. He walked to the edge of the meadow, held the fence with his hand, and whistled to the depths of the meadow. The whistle was not very loud, but it alerted the war horses that were grazing on the meadow and raised their heads. One of the strongest big yellow horses shook its head and pushed its companions away, galloping happily towards Ningquebec. He touched the big yellow horse and tied the leather bag to the buckle next to the saddle through the fence. The leather bag was stuffed with stones. It looked inconspicuous, but was actually very heavy. The big yellow horse bent its forelegs slightly and then quickly stood up straight. However, the balance of its strong body seemed to be a little problematic, and it panted a little faster. Ning Ke untied the leather bag and looked at the big yellow horse, shaking his head. He thought that the iron bow, 13 arrows and 3 knives were already too heavy. Adding his own weight, even if these ordinary warhorses could bear it, they could not bear it for too long, especially in the wilderness. Once they started a chase, they could not maintain it for too long. Having been a soldier at the frontier fortress of the city of Wei for a long time, he knew better than any other student of the academy how important it was to ride in the wilderness. Now that he had entered the world of cultivation, he was even more clear that as long as one was not a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, he still needed to rely on horses to maintain sufficient speed. After thinking for a while, a scene from last year suddenly appeared in his mind. He poured out the stones in the leather bag, jumped into the meadow, and found the steward of the military ministry's horse farm. He took out the waist token of the Imperial Center Administration and whispered something to him. After returning to Chang'an, he did not return to Lin 47th Street immediately. Instead, he went to the Southern Gate Taoist Temple at the foot of the Imperial City. As a disciple, he had to report to his master that he was going to travel far, and maybe his master would give him some gift. Master Yen Sei knew that Ning Ke was going to the wilderness earlier than himself. After thinking about it these days, he felt that His Majesty's arrangement was always good for his disciple, so he gradually calmed down his annoyance. Unlike second brother, he did not tell Ning Ke not to disgrace the prestige of the academy. Instead, he said seriously, "The barbarians on the grassland are not terrible, but the desolate man and his companions returning to the south will be the greatest danger. Logically speaking, with the headmaster of the academy, His Majesty, and me, few people in the world dare to harm you. But you have to remember that it is not the Tang Empire." "Master, don't worry," Ning Ke said with a smile. The distant wilderness often represented mystery and danger for people from the Central Plains. But for Ning Ke, who had been killing horse gang in the wilderness since he left Min Mountain, it was the most familiar place for him. No matter how powerful the enemy he encountered there was, he believed that he could at least keep his life. Without this confidence, he would not have agreed to the request of the imperial court. Thinking of the papal cavalrymen sent by the Divine Hall this time and the powerhouses of the judicial department hidden in the dark, Master Yen Sei frowned slowly and looked at Ning Ke seriously. He said, "In the past, the enemies you met in the wilderness were all ordinary people. Even the most ferocious horse gang might not make you feel afraid. But you have to remember that the enemy you will face this time may be cultivators or the remnants of the devil's doctrine hidden among the desolate man. Anyway, you have to be careful." Ning Ke stopped smiling and said seriously, "I understand." Next, Master Yen Sei finished the last lesson before the arrival of autumn. He explained in detail the pinnacle of talisman Taoism, the wonderful meaning of characters. Then he handed a brocade bag to Ning Ke and explained that there were some wonderful things in the bag. If he was really in danger, he might as well open it and have a look. The black horse carriage slowly drove on the straight long street. With the cracks of the flagstones under the wheels shaking from time to time, Ning Ke looked at the brocade bag in his hand and could not help laughing. Sure enough, he got some parting gift. He could not guess what was in the brocade bag. Thinking of those famous scenes in novels, he did not want to open it. If it was opened, it would be useless. Would he have the face to go back to the Southern Gate Temple and ask for another one from Master Yen Sei? Well, with his temperament, he could really do such a thing. But why bother? It was already dusk when he returned to the old brush pen shop. The setting sun shone from the end of Lin 47th Street, turning half of the street red. He said hello to Mr. Wu of the antique shop next door, glanced at the empty gray wall behind him, and walked in. The rice was steamed in the pot, and white steam filled the air. It slowly curled up along the tree in the courtyard and floated towards the red sky. It didn't float too high before dissipating in the air, leaving not even a trace. Sang Sang looked up at the fog dissipating in the air with her willowy eyes squinting beautifully. Ning Ke looked at the little figure beside the tree and said, "I'm back." Sang Sang looked back at him and said, "Young master, you're back." For many years, whenever Ning Ke returned to the hunting house or the small courtyard in the city of Wei, he would have such a conversation with the little girl in the courtyard. It was no exception this year at Lin 47th Street in Chang'an City. The only difference was that he added the word "young master" in the middle. The dinner before leaving was also the same. Although the bowl of amber chicken soup expressed some kind of solemnity, there was really nothing to say. Since there was nothing to say, Ning Ke lay on the bed and began to sleep after washing his feet and turning off the light. He did not say anything to the little girl on the other side of the bed. Although this would be the first time that he would be separated from Sang Sang for such a long time, he believed that the little girl could take good care of herself, because the little girl had been taking care of both of their lives these years. Now that he was not a troublemaker, she should be happier and more relaxed. In Chang'an at the end of summer, the temperature at night was no longer that annoying. The cicadas on the tree gradually disappeared. The sky full of stars shone on the quiet leaves, and then reflected from the window, painting the wall and bed with their favorite silver color. With a rustling sound, Sang Sang crawled over from the other side of the bed in thin clothes. Her skinny knees pressed on the silver bedding, and then she lay in Ning Ke's arms. Ning Ke opened his eyes and said, "I have said many times that you are a big girl now." Sang Sang hummed and adjusted her position. She put her head on his chest and refused to move again. The night before their departure was no different from many other nights in the past. The morning before parting was the same as the mornings of the previous year. There was no difference. After eating a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup bought by Sang Sang, Ning Ke brushed his teeth with the toothbrush Sang Sang gave him and washed his face with the towel Sang Sang wrung. With the help of Sang Sang's small hands, Ning Ke picked up the heavy luggage, opened the door and walked out. The morning light was clear and bright. He waved to the little girl at the door and the horse carriage slowly moved. At the edge of the large meadow in front of the academy, the black horse carriage stopped and turned back. Today the coachman Old Duan did not need to wait for Ning Ke to return to the city, because Ning Ke would not return to the city. The meadow was already a boiling cauldron of voices. The excited and nervous students of the academy said goodbye to their parents. The parents seemed to have endless things to say, and there seemed to be something missing in the luggage they prepared for their children. However, the young students' thoughts had already drifted to the distant north, as if they saw a bright future of achievements. Of course, not all the students of the academy were so excited and looking forward to the next journey. For example, Chu Yuxian, who was surrounded by the rich businessman in Eastern City and several concubines in the distance, had a face full of complaints and fear. Ning Ke looked over there and smiled. Then he turned to look at Situilan, who was wearing a red archery outfit and looked valiant. He curiously said, "I didn't expect that no one would see you off." Situilan smiled and said, "It's called cultivation, but it's actually a battle. My father only encouraged me to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy, but he didn't want anyone to see me off. Besides, you don't have anyone to see you off either." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I have no parents or relatives. Who would see me off?" Situilan looked at the two people coming out of the academy and said, "It seems that someone will come to see you off." It was third sister Yulien and Chen Pippi who came out of the academy. The students of the academy and the elders on the meadow knew their identities through the teaching office, and hurriedly made way for them. The autumn breeze softly blew the hair on the woman's forehead, making this proud and small female professor, whose real age could not be seen, look a little younger. Since entering the second floor of the academy, Ning Ke rarely had a chance to talk with third sister in private. Seeing her coming to see him off, he could not help feeling a little surprised and said, "Thank you, senior sister." Yulien gave him a small object and said with a smile, I don't have anything to give you, but I'll give you a message. No matter what happens, you just need to follow your heart and you'll be able to overcome it easily. Thank you, senior sister. Ning Ke turned to Chun Pippi and looked at this friend who had brought endless help to his cultivation. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "What are you going to give me?" A gust of morning wind came to the meadow and wrinkled Chun Pippi's face. He said seriously, "I'll see you off, okay?" Ning Ke shook his head and sighed. "You're getting more and more shameless." Chun Pippi sighed and said, "I'll learn from you." Ning Ke answered with a smile, "We'll make progress together." Chun Pippi also smiled and then asked seriously, "Do you have anything to tell me?" Ning Ke wanted to say that he had already told him what he should, but he still said after thinking, "You know." "What do I know? I have a little handmaiden at home." From a young soldier from the border town, to climbing the stairs and defeating the third young master Xie, to being forgotten by the academy, and then to being forgotten by the academy, to climbing the stairs and defeating Prince Longqing, to finally become the only student to enter the second floor, and then to lead all his classmates to the wilderness of the north of Yen Kingdom for practice. Now, Ning Ke had undoubtedly become a legend in the eyes of the ordinary students of the academy. His conversation with Sidhu Ilan had already attracted a lot of attention. Then, following the arrival of Professor Yu Lian and Chun Pippi, even more gazes fell on him. These gazes were extremely complicated. Some were respectful, some were envious, and some were jealous, but none dared to show any hatred. When Ning Ke picked up the heavy luggage at his feet and walked towards the meadow, the dozens of eyes that had been silently watching him were filled with shock and confusion. What kind of horse would be able to withstand so much baggage and look so heavy? Why was he walking toward the meadow? 3 padeos, a dismantled iron bow and 13 talisman arrows in the quiver, a boxwood bow and ordinary arrows, and even a small folded tent and a big black umbrella tightly wrapped in coarse cloth were the necessities of the journey. The luggage had been carefully organized by Sang Sang last night, and its volume had been reduced to the point where it could not be reduced anymore. But because there were so many things, it still looked spectacular when put together, like a small mountain. Ning Ke carried the heavy luggage and walked to the meadow fence, looking into the distance to find his target. On the other side of the fence, the remaining military horses that had been defeated by the academy students were silently eating grass or resting with their heads down. It was hard to tell whether they were dispirited or not. In the wide meadow further away, a black shadow was running back and forth, like a black thunder, and the sound of hooves was loud. When the black shadow slowed down, it could be seen clearly that it was an extremely strong black horse. The big black horse kept chasing and bumping into its companions. The other horses ran away in fear, but the big black horse continued to chase and bite them. It neighed proudly from time to time, which made it seem particularly domineering and mean. Ning Ke looked at the big black horse and smiled. He put his finger in his mouth and whistled. The whistling sound spread to the top of the meadow. The big black horse, who was arrogantly bullying its companions, suddenly stiffened when it heard the whistle. Its 4 legs were like nails nailed into the soft grass, and it could not move even half a step. It looked like a wooden horse that had been painted black. Only 2 big black eyes were moving quickly, and one could clearly see the fear in them. It twisted its stiff neck with difficulty and looked back at the figure by the fence in the distance. It finally connected the most unpleasant memory in its mind with this person. Another whistle sounded, as if it was urging it to move. The big black horse lifted its hooves with difficulty and walked slowly to the fence with its head down. Every step was so reluctant, as if it was a female star who was about to marry into a notorious rich family and did not know what her future would be like. The big black horse strolled to the fence and looked at Ning Ke behind the fence. It shook its head slightly and flipped its thick lips in a funny way, as if it was expressing absolute submission and flattery. It had been more than a year since the academy entrance examination of the academy. The big black horse's temper had not improved at all. It was still violent and irritable. However, in front of Ning Ke, it still did not dare to lose its temper. However, when it saw the luggage that was like a small hill under Ning Ke's feet, it could no longer care about its instinctive fear. It let out a frightened neigh and turned around, ready to run away. Ning Ke stared at it and said, "Old rules." The big black horse stopped. Ning Ke continued, "If you don't listen to me, I'll kill you." The big black horse lowered its head and turned around. Ning Ke hung the mountain-like luggage on its saddle. At the end of summer and the beginning of autumn in the 14th year of Tianqi era, the academy began this year's practical cultivation. The leader was the weakest disciple of the second floor of the academy in history, who had not even met the teacher and eldest brother. In the backyard of the old brush pen shop, Sang Sang stared at the old hen and thought that she should have killed it yesterday so that it could eat more. Otherwise, what if it got hungry on the way? On the outskirts of Chang'an, Ning Ke looked at the picturesque village and thought that he would not be able to drink the chicken soup she made for many days. He had just left and he already missed it. The empire was shrouded in a faint glimmer in the early morning. The sound of hooves and the fluttering indigo clothes. Volume 1. The End of the Empire in the Early Morning. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 197. In the 14th year of the Tang Tianqi era, the wild tribe, who had been wandering in the cold region of the far north for thousands of years, returned to the south and occupied the grassland of the left king's palace. This led to the palace's cavalry to harass and attack the central plains further south. In order to deal with the unprecedented danger, the West Hill Divine Palace issued an edict, calling on the followers of Haotian Taoism and the righteous to help the Yen kingdom against the barbarian invasion. At the same time, the Tang Empire sent troops from the west to aid the Yen kingdom. Because of the arrival of the reinforcements, the left king's palace's cavalry became much more restrained. Especially when the vanguard of the Tang Empire's Yen Kingdom army came to the wilderness of northern Yen along the eastern edge of Min Mountain, the left king's palace Chanyu tightened the restrictions on the tribes. It was hard to find any trace of the barbarian cavalry in the windy wilderness. The reason why the barbarian cavalry was difficult to deal with was that they had a large grassland behind them. They would hide in the long grass once they saw something was wrong, making it impossible for them to pursue. Unless the current monarchs had the ambition of Emperor Taizu of the Tang dynasty, there was no way to completely eliminate this threat. Therefore, when the barbarian cavalry's invasion of the Yen kingdom became less serious and the left king's palace sent messengers to negotiate, the Central Plains troops gathered in the north of the Yen kingdom did not go north. Instead, they chose to stay and focus on the defense of the various border fortresses. The situation at the border fortress became much calmer. The 100,000 troops stationed outside the Yen kingdom were called the Central Plains Coalition Army. In fact, other than the young cultivators from the South Jin Kingdom and Yueluan Kingdom, they were basically the Yen kingdom's own troops and the Tang Empire's reinforcement. The so-called reinforcement was the elite troops of the West King's border army under the command of General Xiao. This troop, known for its ruthlessness, had conquered 11 cities of the Yen kingdom in the war 10 years ago, leaving a painful memory for the Yen people. In the eyes of the Yen people, the Tang Empire's reinforcement was more abominable and terrifying than the barbarian cavalry on the grassland. Due to such simple feelings and the contrast of power, the Yen kingdom's monarch and ordinary soldiers all showed a certain degree of vigilance towards the Tang Empire's reinforcement in the west. Although they still sent pigs and cattle as a greeting on the surface, in fact, the Yen kingdom's troops kept a considerable distance from the Tang Empire's reinforcement. The two sides occupied the east and west front lines of the Yen kingdom's northern border. They looked at each other from afar and ignored each other. They even paid great attention to each other's movements. The young cultivators who had received the edict from the West Hill Divine Palace naturally stayed with the Yen kingdom's army, while the students from the Southern Academy in Chang'an naturally stayed in the camp of the Tang Empire's reinforcement army. It was already the end of autumn, and the northern part of the wilderness was cold. The air turned into fog, and the grass had already turned yellow. Somewhere in the north of Yen Kingdom, there was a meadow outside a military camp at the frontier fortress. The few trees on the meadow had already lost all their leaves. Standing there, one could easily see through the clear sky and into the distance. For example, the black smoke from some unknown object burning in the wilderness in the distance, and the injured soldiers lying on the creaking carriages. Now that the situation at the frontier fortress was calm, it was possible that peace talks would be held soon. However, in the depths of the wilderness, small-scale battles between the Tang cavalry and the grassland cavalry still occurred occasionally. Every few days, bodies and wounded would be transported back. Ning Ke sat on the meadow and looked to the northwest. His hand on his knee was slowly stroking a small token. The material of the token was a little strange. It was not gold, jade, stone, or wood, but it was very hard. It was given to him by senior sister Yu Lian before he left the academy. He did not pay attention to it at that time, but he remembered it later on the journey. He often held it in his hand and played with it. He was a little curious about the purpose of this token, and also used it to reduce his nostalgia for Chang'an. There was a blurry black line under the high sky in the northwest direction. It did not look conspicuous at all. However, he had been there, and he knew how tall and majestic the undulating mountains were. Therefore, he increasingly felt that the sky and the wilderness were indescribably vast. The blurry black line was the majestic Min Mountain that divided the northern part of the continent into two parts. He and Sang Sang mainly lived in the eastern foothills of the Min Mountain when they were young. 10 years ago, when they walked out from the western cliff, they met Zhu'er, whose home had been destroyed. That memory was very long ago, but it was still clear. Because he had been there, he remembered that there would be a naturally formed gap in the middle of the Min Mountain. The Min Mountain, which stretched for thousands of miles from the south to the north, divided the southern part of the wilderness into two halves, and also separated the Tang Empire from the Yen Kingdom. If they did not want to go around the northern part of the wilderness, the army had to pass through that gap. Such an important military location was, of course, firmly controlled by the Tang Empire. The most elite division of the Empire's Northern Road Army was stationed there. The most important military mission of the Empire's Northern Road Army was not to guard the dangerous place or to threaten the Left Tent Palace or the Yen Kingdom in the eastern part of the grassland. What really worried the Empire was the most powerful Golden Palace in the wilderness, which was also the place where Princess Li Yu had been married. The military fortress of the city of Wei, where Ning Ke had lived for many years, was one of the 7 citadels. The 7 citadels belonged to the most inconspicuous frontier fortress defense line of the elite division of the Northern Road Army. At this moment, looking northwest, he seemed to be able to see the city of Wei on the other side of the Min Mountain, the hometown that truly belonged to him and Sang Sang. He could not help but feel some longing and warmth in his heart. He did not know how the old people in the city of Wei were doing now, or how General Ma was doing. He did not know if they had received the banknotes sent by the carriage and horse company in spring. If they knew that he had made a name for himself in Chang'an, how much wine would they drink to celebrate? And when should he and Sang Sang go back to see them? We have been stationed here for more than a month, and we have only sent some cavalry out for reconnaissance. When will we really attack? It will be winter in a few days, and the soldiers will have to pay a higher price when they enter the wilderness. A young officer sat beside Ning Ke, and his light armor was polished. Looking at the empty wilderness and the wounded soldiers on the horse carriages, he frowned slightly and said angrily, "I really don't know what the general's mansion is thinking. I heard that General Xiahou did not even enter the Yen Kingdom and is still in the Tuyang City mansion. It is really outrageous." Ning Ke looked at him and smiled, saying, "There is no need to use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. General Xiahou does not need to deal with the cavalry of the Left King's palace in person. The imperial court has sent half of the Western military army here, which is enough to show respect to the left king's palace. General Xiahou stayed in Tuyang City, and did not come to the frontier fortress to command in person, because he knew that the war would not start. Since there is no need to go deep into the wilderness, what is the difference between autumn and winter? The young officer was Chong Jingming, a student of the academy. He had excellent results in riding and archery in the military ministry, and had once served in the Yulin Royal Guards. This time, he came to the front of the Yen army and was assigned to the northernmost and most dangerous fortress. However, he did not have any objection, and instead was eager to lead the cavalry into the wilderness and make great achievements for the empire like his predecessors. He did not expect that they would be trapped for more than a month, and the troops did not have the intention to go into battle at all. He had been feeling a little depressed these days, and when he heard Ning Kei's words, he retorted, "The countries in the Central Plains have made such a big movement, and the Divine Hall has issued an edict, and the Empire has sent out reinforcements. It would cost a lot of money just to feed the troops every day, and it took them so much effort to gather all the troops. How could they not fight?" Ning Kei said with a smile, "Then do you think they are going to fight?" Chong Jingming pointed at the horse carriages below the meadow and said, "Small-scale battles have been happening all the time. I don't think they are not going to fight, but the coalition forces are just arguing, and there is no way to confirm when they will start a large-scale attack." Ning Kei shook his head and said, "Small-scale battles will definitely continue, but that is for the negotiation and bargaining with the left king's palace. You have to figure out the ultimate purpose of the 200,000 troops in the south of the wilderness. If you understand this, you will know why the war will not happen after all." "Why?" Chong Jingming frowned and asked. Ning Kei asked, "Why does the left king's palace want to disturb the border?" Chong Jingming answered without thinking, "Because the barbarians are cruel and greedy by nature." Ning Kei said grumpily, "Nonsense. Everyone is greedy." Chong Jingming hesitated and said, "Is it because the desolate men are moving south?" Ning Kei looked at the young officer and said, "The real enemy of Chanyu of the left king's palace is the desolate man tribe behind them. The West Hill Divine Palace issued the edict to guard against the possible revival of the Devil's Doctrine caused by the desolate men moving south. As for the Tang Empire, the desolate men were crippled by us in the past, so of course we have to guard against them taking revenge after they become strong. So in the end, everyone is worried about the desolate man warriors in a more distant place." The desolate man had been away from the wilderness for more than 1,000 years. For the people of the Central Plains, it was a legend that was so long ago that it was hard to remember. On the journey to the frontier fortress, the students of the academy had crammed some knowledge and roughly understood the long history. But for them and the people of the Central Plains, this tribe was still extremely mysterious. "But I heard that there are only a few 100,000 desolate men left now. Even if all of them are soldiers, they can't pose any threat to the Central Plains. On the contrary, the left king's palace has countless good knights. If they really move south like locusts." The left king's palace, which is powerful in your eyes, was robbed of a large grassland by the desolate men. They were driven south and forced to cross the line that the Tang Empire drew for them. Now these desolate men, who are known as natural warriors, can do this with only a few 100,000 people. If they are given time to stand firm in the north and multiply, don't you think it's terrifying? Why wouldn't the West Hill Divine Palace and the Imperial Court be nervous? Ning Kei said with a smile, "Don't forget, as long as there is enough food, it's always easy to have children." Chong Jingming asked after a long silence, "Then what should we do?" Ning Kei looked at the black smoke in the distance of the vast wilderness and said after thinking for a moment, "Looking at the current situation, I guess the West Hill Divine Palace and the Imperial Court have the same idea, which is to force Chanyu of the Left King's Palace to start a new war with the desolate men. We are responsible for providing him with military equipment and food, and they are responsible for fighting." Chang Jingming asked in confusion. The desolate men are forced to move south because they can't win. Why would the left king's palace be so stupid to turn back and fight? That's why we are here now. The Divine Hall and the Imperial Court have made their stance very clear. They have written a multiple-choice question for Chanyu to choose. Either you fight with us or you fight with the desolate men with our support. You will definitely die in the former, but you might die in the latter. There's always a difference between certain and possible. Chang Jingming was stunned. He didn't expect things to be so complicated. He said with emotion, "This multiple-choice question is really hard to choose." Ning Ke patted his shoulder and said, "Chanyu thinks so too." At this moment, dozens of the most elite light cavalry from the West Road appeared at the back of the meadow. The captain looked at Ning Ke, who was above the meadow, anxiously, as if he wanted to get closer but didn't dare to. Chang Jingming looked at the elite cavalry under the meadow, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. He recognized that they should be the direct cavalry of the general's mansion. He couldn't help but be slightly shocked and subconsciously looked at Ning Ke beside him. The Tang captain under the meadow looked up at Ning Ke and said worriedly, "Mr. 13, it's too close to the barbarians. It's really not safe. Let's go back to the military camp." "Mr. 13? Chang Jingming looked at Ning Ke and asked in confusion. Ning Ke looked at the nervous cavalry under the meadow and sighed helplessly. He stood up and explained to Chang Jingming, "They don't know who I am. They only know that I'm the 13th. Chang Jingming also stood up. "I'm the leader of the academy. Although I'm not responsible for your life and death, I still have to care about what you're doing." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I'm here today to see how you're doing. Since I'm being urged, I have to leave early. I'll go to the Blue Water Battalion tomorrow. Situ Ilan and Wang Ying are there. Thank you for your hard work." Chang Jingming said seriously, "I'm just an inspector who is put on a pedestal, eating and drinking everywhere. What hard work is there to talk about?" Ning Ke laughed at himself and waved his hand to indicate that he didn't need to see him off. He patted his butt and walked down the meadow. When he reached the meadow, he looked at the border captain who had followed him for a whole month and the soldiers who were looking around vigilantly as if they would encounter the grassland cavalry at any time. He said helplessly, "This is still the Tang military camp. Why are you so nervous? Are you really going to follow me like this every day?" The captain replied seriously, "The higher-ups have given strict orders that we must ensure your safety." Ning Ke thought of the free and boring life at the frontier fortress for more than a month and couldn't help but shake his head. He said, "I'm just an ordinary practical cultivator. How can I be followed by dozens of elite cavalrymen every day? I'm not General Xiao. I can't afford such treatment." The captain explained respectfully, "Mr. 13, although we don't know your real identity, the order from the general's mansion clearly states that your safety is more important than that of the general." This was a very true answer. There were not many people in the West Road Army who knew Ning Ke's true identity. The reason why the general's mansion was so concerned about Ning Ke's safety was not because General Xiahou knew that he was a secret guard and had come with His Majesty's supervision mission. It was because of a very simple reason. Dozens of students of the academy were practicing in the front line. They had to use real swords and spears to hone their military skills. This was the practice of the Tang Empire. Therefore, from the ministers in the court to the generals at the frontier fortress, they would only treat these young people as ordinary military officers. However, Ning Ke was not an ordinary student of the academy. He was a student of the second floor of the academy. All these years, there had never been a student of the second floor of the academy joining the military for practical cultivation. Ning Ke was the only exception. As a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, if something happened to such a person in the front line, even if he lost a hair, it would cause a huge uproar. General Xiahou might be able to bear the anger of His Majesty, but he didn't have the courage to face the disappointment of the headmaster of the academy. Therefore, after coming from Chang unto the frontier fortress of the wilderness of the north of Yen Kingdom, Ning Ke did not return to the familiar days of fighting on horseback. Instead, he was treated like an ancestor by the West Road Army. The entire military camp carefully protected his safety. Whether it was drinking or eating meat, they satisfied any of his requests, but they would never let him get close to any possible danger. Therefore, apart from following the ups and downs of the frontier fortress to visit the academy students like Chang Jingming, there was nothing else he could do. Ning Ke looked at the cavalrymen who were respectfully waiting to escort him away. He could not help but sigh. He put his finger in his mouth and whistled. A big black horse rushed out from the back of the meadow. The big black horse was carrying a heavy luggage, but it still galloped and kept chewing. No one knew what it was eating that made it so happy on the meadow where the leaves had fallen and the grass was covered with frost. First, I strongly recommend Miss Futian's new book, The Treacherous Official. I can absolutely guarantee it with my credit. It's a good book in line with my 3 views and aesthetic standard. Now it's the first book on the list of new book. It's the one that's more popular than Bean. Second, the new assistant, Pomelo, has taken office. I applaud and cheer. She's a little girl. Please help and be considerate. If there's anything wrong, it's all my fault. I cupped my hands. Third, the beginning is really the most difficult. I started writing at 12 o'clock today. I'm really stupid. I deleted and wrote again and again. I changed many ways and finally chose the driest way. I skipped a lot of instructions in the middle. I feel sad when I think of the money I've lost. Fourth, it's almost Monday. I strongly need recommendation vote. Please give me your support. Please don't force me to write a single chapter tomorrow. Fifth, I'm really scared about the second volume. I hope you can praise me and give me positive energy. I believe I can overcome the difficulties and write better and better. Good night, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 198. The wind didn't blow in the border camp at night, and the bright red tongues of fire on the woodpile could gently shake their waste. Dozens of Tang border army elites were scattered around, either in deep sleep or vigilantly standing guard. Only Ning Ke and the captain were sitting by the fire. In the daytime, the captain called Ning Ke Mr. 13, as if he didn't know his real identity. However, at this time, beside the red warm fire, his title had been changed in a whisper. Your Excellency Ning, do you really want to go to Dongxing Stockade Village tomorrow? It's too close to Yen Kingdom. There may be trouble. Ning Ke was fiddling with the sweet potatoes in the fire with a branch. Hearing this, he looked up at him and couldn't help shaking his head. Looking around at the border army elites who didn't pay attention to him, he said, I've stayed in the frontier fortress for more than a month, but I didn't get into any trouble. In my opinion, this is the real trouble. He looked at the captain's seemingly dull and honest face and sighed. Speaking of which, isn't our luck a bit too bad? You are the only secret bodyguard in Tuyang City, but you are sent to follow me. So I don't know who to ask if I want to ask about the situation in Tuyang City. The captain said with a wry smile, I also feel helpless when I know it's me who personally protects Your Excellency. Could it be that General's Mansion knows your identity as a secret bodyguard, but they are too embarrassed to do anything to you, so they simply drive you out of Tuyang City and follow me around, or have they even found out my identity? The captain shook his head and said, Please rest assured, Your Excellency. My identity should not be leaked. As for Your Excellency, I think neither the military counselor nor the inner vanguard camp can guess that you are actually the secret bodyguard of His Majesty. Ning Ke pulled out 2 roasted sweet potatoes from the fire and gave one to the captain. He grabbed it with his fingertips and slowly tore off the skin of the other sweet potato. He lowered his head and began to gnaw on the steaming white flesh. He said vaguely, It's fine as long as no one finds out. I don't want to be watched by someone in the dark whenever I do something." The captain picked up the cooked sweet potato that rolled to his feet and looked at Ning Kei's face reflected by the fire, not knowing what to say. He had mixed feelings about Mr. 13 next to him. Other soldiers might not know Ning Kei's identity, but he was a secret guard. Of course, he knew that Ning Kei was a core disciple of the headmaster of academy. Why would such a distinguished bigwig come to the frontier fortress? What puzzled him even more was that they had to do such a troublesome thing. Why bother? It should be known that this was the wilderness with few people. This was a battlefield where long grasses hid bones. If one really angered General Xiahou, the general would not care whether you were a student of the second floor of the academy or not. He would kill you and throw you into the depths of the grassland. Who would know how you died? Even the headmaster couldn't do anything about it. A faint sound came from afar. The cavalryman in charge of the night patrol stood up and walked toward the periphery. The captain glanced in that direction and changed the way he addressed him for the sake of safety. He said softly, "Mr. 13, what are you here to investigate? With a goal in mind, this subordinate can make arrangement. I came to the frontier fortress not to investigate anything, but to take a look on behalf of His Majesty." Ning Kei threw the half-eaten sweet potato into the fire and wiped the residue on his face with his sleeve. He said, "But according to the current situation, there is no way to see anything. You have a special identity. The general's mansion is worried that something will happen to you. They also don't want you to get into trouble. Of course, they want you to stay as far away as possible. If you want to see someone in the general's mansion, you can't see him without going to Tuyang City." The captain hesitated for a moment and then directly mentioned Tuyang City. He knew very well that an important figure like Mr. 13, who had received His Majesty's secret order to come to the frontier fortress to inspect on behalf of the Son of Heaven, was only qualified to enjoy such treatment. However, he still did not dare to directly say General Xiahou's name. The students of the academy had passed through Tuyang City on their way from Chang'an City to the frontier fortress of northern Yan Kingdom. At that time, the general's mansion was in charge of receiving them, so Ning Kei had not seen General Xiahou in person. Now hearing the words Tuyang City, he thought of the famous general in Tuyang City who was known for his violence. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "I will go there in the future." The next day, Ning Kei and dozens of elite soldiers of the Tang army who protected him set off again. They marched to the east along the simple frontier fortress defense line in the north of Yan Kingdom. It was just past noon when they arrived at the easternmost part of the western front line that the Tang army was responsible for. Looking over the dry willows, they could clearly see a piece of green mountains and the yellow city not far from the mountains. More than a dozen officers were waiting for their arrival outside Dongxing Stockade Village. The general of Dongxing Stockade Village did not know who Mr. 13 was. He just guessed from the documents of the general's mansion in Tuyang City and the excited expressions of those subordinate officers that he should be a bigwig from Chang'an City and should have some relationship with the academy. Ning Kei looked at the officers outside the stockade village and smiled. He jumped down from the big black horse. He first exchanged a few polite words with the general and then walked to the right side. He walked to someone and said with a smile, "Are you used to staying here?" The officer in front of him was a young girl, dressed in an archery outfit and covered with dust from the wilderness. She looked at Ning Kei and said with a smile, "Although it is not as comfortable as you, I am still used to it." Ning Kei said with a smile, "You have to get used to it even if you are not used to it. I have told you before that the real battlefield is not the same as what you guys imagine in Chang'an City." Then he noticed that Linchuan Wangying was also standing among the officers. The 15-year-old boy was blown away a lot of immaturity by the wind and sand of the frontier fortress, and his posture seemed to be a lot taller. He looked at these academy students who had come to the front line for less than a month, but their temperament and spirit had changed a lot from when they were in Chang'an City. He said with appreciation, "It seems that everyone is still very used to the life here. I am relieved." The general of Dongxing Stockade Village followed him. Seeing that Ning Ke did not pay attention to him, he was a little unhappy. He thought that even if Ning Ke was a bigwig from Chang'an City, he was not qualified to put on airs in the military camp. However, when he heard this dialogue, he immediately understood that Mr. 13 was really a bigwig who could not be provoked. Anyone who dared to speak like this to the daughter of General Yunhui and dared to put on airs to the academy students was a real bigwig. The training goal of the academy students in the future was to become officials of the imperial court, and they would not have anything to do with the military system. However, the Tang Empire was founded by martial arts, and frontline practice was an indispensable part of the training plan. Dongxing Stockade Village was located in the easternmost part of the Tang Army's defense line. It was very close to a tribe of the Left King's Palace, and it was also very close to the Yen Kingdom Army and the young masters of the Central Plains who came to help. It was under double pressure, and it could be said that it was the most difficult place in the Yen Kingdom Army. For thousands of years, the Academy's practice principle was that students should go where the most difficult place was. Therefore, this Yellow Earth city with 3,000 troops and horses had the most Academy students. In addition to the cavalry troops, there were a total of 11 Academy students. On the journey from Chang'an to the frontier fortress of northern Yen Kingdom, Ning Ke and the Academy students were very familiar with each other. Moreover, those who participated in the practice were all Tang students. Those disputes in the past had long disappeared. When the two sides met again after more than a month, they were naturally enthusiastic and lively. After experiencing the real bloody life on the battlefield and experiencing life and death, the young people would quickly mature. And it was because of their maturity that their enthusiasm for Ning Ke would inevitably be mixed with some admiration and a sense of distance. After all, Ning Ke was a student of the second floor of the academy, and his identity and status had been far away from theirs. By the Blue Lake, Situ Ilan took out a handkerchief and wet it to wipe off the dust on her forehead. She looked back at the silent Ning Ke and asked, "Are you not used to being surrounded by people?" Ning Ke walked to the lakeside, looked at the shadow of the old wood at the bottom of the lake, and said with a smile, "Being surrounded by people and being respected is the goal of people like us. You grew up in the general's mansion of Chang'an City, and the female army was famous everywhere. How could you understand the mentality of people at the bottom of the society like us?" Situ Ilan stood up and handed the handkerchief to him, and said, "But I saw that you smiled reluctantly before." Ning Ke wiped his face and said, "In the past, these classmates ignored me. Later on the journey, they already got along with me, but now they talk to me so respectfully. The contrast is too big, and I can't adapt to it. So you want to walk with me by the lake alone?" "Yes. The army is the most particular place about social class. Military orders are like mountains. As long as it is a superior, no matter whether the military orders issued by him are reasonable or not, no matter whether you think it is to die or not, you must ride the horse and rush forward." Situ Ilan looked at him and said, "After leaving the academy and coming to the front line, they participated in several battles and were severely beaten by the generals for several times. They naturally understood that the world still depends on strength after all." Speaking of fighting and strength, Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "When I first knew you, I thought you were just a wicked girl who ran amok on the street with the help of your family background. I had never seen the legendary female army, and I didn't think it was so great. I really didn't expect that you would take the initiative to choose to come to Dongxing Stockade Village, and do such a good job here." After all, they were young talents selected from the counties of the Tang Empire. Once they adapted to the strict rules of the military camp and the cruel battle, The academy students who participated in the practice soon began to show their abilities. Although they were only low-level officers, they did a good job in the part they were responsible for. Situ Ilan was born in a family of generals. She dared to take on tasks, and her performance was especially outstanding. She had led the cavalry into the wilderness for 6 times in less than a month since she came to Dongxing Stockade Village. Among them, she met the cavalry of the palace twice and beheaded more than 10 times. Her military merits had been reported to Tuyang City, and she was waiting to be rewarded and promoted immediately. The Lieutenant Palace doesn't have the courage to start a full-scale war. Those cavalry are not the palace's elites at all, but the cavalry of small tribes. They just write it like this for the sake of military merit. Situ Ilan was valiant and heroic, without any arrogance, and said, "It's nothing to kill the cavalry of small tribes. If I really fight with the palace cavalry, I dare not say I can win. I can only strive to kill more." Ning Ke rubbed his stiff wrist. It had been nearly 2 years since he left the city of Wei, and his blade had not been stained with the blood of the grassland cavalry for 2 years. At this time, listening to Situ's calm and hot-blooded words, he could not help but miss those bloody times when he rode horses to Shubi Lake and chopped firewood with a knife. "In fact, I have always been curious about what kind of person you are." Situ Ilan turned around by the lake, and her eyebrows slowly raised. She looked at Ning Ke's face with great interest and said, "My father once looked through your files in the military ministry, but he only told me some general information and refused to tell me too many details. When I asked him anxiously, he only said that if there was a chance to fight with you in the future, he would listen to everything you said. I rarely see my father speak so highly of people. What did you do in the city of Wei? I am really proud to be evaluated like this by General Yunhui." Ning Ke looked over her shoulder and fell on the blue lake, thinking of those years in the city of Wei. After a moment of silence, he said, "When I was in the city of Wei, I mainly did one thing." "What thing?" "Killing the horse gang. I heard that the horse gang in the wilderness is the fiercest. Even the cavalry of the Golden Palace is not willing to provoke them. It's not that exaggerated, but the composition of the horse gang is very complicated. There are real horse gang and homeless refugees. I have seen refugees from the north of Yen Kingdom at Shubi Lake. It is so far away, and I don't know how they cross the Min Mountain. And you certainly can't imagine that the most powerful horse gang I have ever met is the cavalry of the Golden Palace in disguise." "The cavalry of the Golden Palace? Did you win or did they win?" "I said that I only did the thing of killing the horse gang. If they won, how could I kill them?" Ning Ke looked at her and said, "I think the reason why General Yunhui said that to you is that he probably knows that I have a good skill of killing people in the wilderness. In fact, this is not unusual." Situ Ilan looked at him and said, "You killed so many horse gang without dying. You are very powerful." Ning Ke said, "I don't deny this. It is said that cultivators are the strongest in the world. But according to those cultivators I have met, if they are put in the wilderness, as long as they meet a team of 100 horse gang, they will never survive." "But you still want to be a cultivator?" "Because I can kill people. If I become a cultivator, I can become a cultivator who can kill people." Ning Ke paused for a moment and said with a smile, "I always have an idea. Don't talk about it outside." Situ Ilan was very interested and said, "I promise I won't leak the secret. Say it quickly." Ning Ke walked to the lakeside and looked at the blue lake extending to the north without an end. He said, "Cultivators do have strong enough personal strength, but in my opinion, these cultivators in the world do not know how to kill people." After thinking for a long time, Situ Ilan frowned and asked, "Killing is killing people?" Ning Ke looked at her and asked a few questions in a row. How to kill people with the least effort? How to kill people when their strength is far less than the enemy's? How to use the environment, wind, and even sunlight to kill people? How to squeeze the last strength to kill people when they are seriously injured and dying. How to kill people without being killed. Sidhu Ilan shook her head and thought that when she met the grassland cavalry in the wilderness, she picked up the bow and arrow to shoot, and picked up the padao to chop. How could there be so many questions? If killing people is really so complicated, can you teach me? This kind of thing can't be taught. You will naturally learn it when you kill more people. So the frontier fortress military camp is the most suitable place to practice killing skills. But cultivators rarely practice in the military camp. Ningke said, fortunately or unfortunately, I have lived in the military camp of the city of Wei for many years. I think this is why General Yunhui thinks I am good, and it is also what you can't understand for the time being. Sidhu Ilan looked at him and asked curiously, You are the first disciple of the second floor of the academy to come to the frontier fortress for practice. Do you want to practice in the military camp? If there is a chance, of course I would like to try on the battlefield with the ability of a cultivator. Ningke started to walk again and walked along the narrow white stones by the lake to the east. He said self-mockingly, But now it seems that neither Tuyang City nor the imperial court will give me such a chance. Sidhu Ilan looked at his back and shook her head. Ningke quietly looked at the blue lake water, looked at the trees and white clouds reflected in the water in the distance, and looked at the depths of the wilderness that could not be seen by the naked eye. He felt that his fingers were more and more itchy. He did not know whether there were cultivators who specially practiced on the battlefield. He was really interested in this idea. However, what really made his hands itch was not this idea, but some very simple things. Being in the wilderness, smelling the smell of horse dung in the wind and the smell of the slightly scorched grass burning, he felt that every part of his body was slightly trembling with excitement like the 3 long knives carried behind him. It was difficult to restrain the urge to rush into the depths of the grassland and swing his knife to cut down one enemy after another. Unfortunately, the blue lake in front of him was not Shubi Lake. No one knew what the name of the lake around Dongxing Stockade Village was among the grassland barbarians. It was slender like a kidney. From here, it extended to the depths of the wilderness in the extreme north, and the end could not be seen. Because the lake was too deep, it was glowing with blue luster, like a sapphire that was melted and condensed into silk. This is a saline lake. The lake water is not drinkable, so we did not camp here. Sidhu Ilan looked at his eyes quietly looking at the lake. She raised her arm and pointed to the forest by the lake in the distance. She said, When the barbarians' cavalry invaded the south in the past, they all drilled out from that forest. It was very sudden. But in recent days, no grassland people dare to approach here. Ningke looked at the faintly visible forest in the fog and asked, Can we go there now? After crossing that forest, we will arrive at the eastern front of the Yen army. In order to avoid trouble, we don't go there. Of course, they don't come here. Both sides have a tacit understanding to ignore that place. Have you seen those people? Who? Young masters from various countries who came here because of the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace, such as the Sword Garret and the White Tower. Sidhu Ilan shook her head and said, I haven't seen them. But after the last encounter with the cavalry, Dongxing Stockade Village sent troops to expel that tribe. As a result, they met the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Hearing the words, papal cavalrymen, Ningke turned around and asked, and then? Sidhu Ilan thought of the scene that day, and was still a little angry. She sneered and said, It was obviously the battle of our Dongxing Stockade Village, and we had basically wiped out all the enemies. As a result, those cavalrymen of the Divine Hall who had been watching coldly finally rushed up. They wanted to grab the credit? Yes, many heads were chopped off by them. Wang Ying quarreled with them, but he didn't win. Ningke said, I thought Wang Ying had matured a lot on the battlefield. I didn't expect him to be so childish. Sidhu Ilan said angrily, Do you think we shouldn't quarrel? Of course we shouldn't quarrel. What can we get from quarreling? When we used to collect firewood at Shubi Lake, we never quarreled with people from the 7 stockade villages who came to rob the military credit. Ning Ke looked at the calm lake, shook his head and said, "We directly drew our knives and chopped. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 199. Being a soldier, Ning Ke hated snatching military exploits the most. As he said at this time, in the wilderness outside the city of Wei, if other troops of the 7 stockade villages snatched the military exploits, he and his companions would directly take out their swords to chop them. Whoever won would get the military exploit. The rules in the wilderness were so simple. The Tang army of Dongxing Stockade Village actually watched their military exploits being robbed by the papal cavalry of West Hill. In addition to cursing, they didn't even take out their swords to kill the other side? He was confused and inevitably angry. After a while, he calmed down, thinking that this place was far away from Tuyang City, and it was not too much for the Tang generals to be low-key and conservative. He shook his head, looked at the wilderness far away from the lake and said, "If I take the troops into the wilderness to collect firewood, the West Hill will dare to grab the firewood. You see how I will deal with them." Situ Ilan didn't say anything. She walked slowly along the lakeside with her hands behind her back. Suddenly she stopped, turned around and looked at him, saying, "My family in Chang sent a letter saying that they would arrange a marriage for me." The slightly cold weather made the breath from the girl's lips quickly turn into white mist, which added some beauty to her refreshing face. Ning Ke looked at the misty breath and the girl's face in front of him. He was stunned for a moment and asked, "Then?" Situ Ilan shook her head, turned back and continued to walk along the lakeside and said, "I don't want to marry." Upon hearing her reply, Ning Ke's mood became a little lighter, but then suddenly became a little heavier. He had an inexplicable feeling of not being able to find the right direction. He looked at the girl's back and said, "We really should be more cautious about this kind of thing." Situ Ilan didn't look back and said with a smile, "I heard that many ministers in Chang and City want to recruit you as a son-in-law." With Ning Ke's current reputation in Chang and City, not to mention the glory of being a core disciple of the headmaster of Academy, His Majesty's appreciation and love for him were enough for countless ministers to start thinking about selling their daughters and granddaughters to him. Ning Ke smiled and said, "General Yun, we probably didn't mean that." Situ Ilan looked back at him and said, "My father knew that I was familiar with you, and he really thought about it." Ning Ke felt a little hot on his cheeks, subconsciously touched it, and didn't know how to answer. With her hands behind her back, Situ Ilan stepped on the white round stone by the lake and continued to move forward. She said, "But I didn't agree." Ning Ke looked at the girl in light armor and her black braids swaying restlessly behind her. After a moment of silence, he could not hold back his curiosity and some kind of emotion that could not be expressed. He asked, "Why?" "Because I don't want to get married." The girl's answer was concise and powerful. Her crisp laughter awakened the thin layer of ice on the surface of the lake. "There hasn't been a female general in the Empire all these years. I want to be a female general, so I don't have time to think about marriage." Ning Ke could not help but feel a little ashamed as he listened to her. He kicked a weird-shaped white stone into the lake and said, "I'm focused on cultivation and have no time to think about these things." Situ Ilan turned around and looked at the stone that smashed the thin ice and slowly sank to the bottom of the lake. After a moment of silence, she laughed heartily and looked at him and asked, "If you have time to think about it, what kind of girl do you like?" Listening to this question, Ning Ke could not help but think of the conversation with Chen Pippi in the back of the mountain of the academy. After thinking for a long time, he rubbed his chin and said seriously, "I like beautiful girls with white skin, red phoenix eyes, red lips and a plump figure. It's better to be smart in terms of temperament. Don't always let me think about things." Situ Ilan looked at him and shook her head. She sighed and said, "Your requirements are really not high." The ideas of most men in the world are almost the same. I can't see any novelty in you. Life was originally a very boring thing. Whether in Chang'an City or in the wilderness of northern Yen Kingdom, what was the essential difference between climbing buildings every day and wandering every day? The academy students who practiced in Dongxing Stockade Village had their own combat task. It was impossible for them to accompany Ning Ke to stroll around the stockade village, eat, drink and chat every day. He had to stroll around the stockade village, eat, drink and chat with himself. It was extremely monotonous and boring. After a few days, he finally could not bear such a boring life anymore. He secretly led the big black horse and avoided the sight of the dozens of inseparable cavalrymen. He went out of the stockade village and came to the blue lakeside to relax. Without the dozens of cavalrymen following behind him as the second son, Ning Ke walked a little further today. He ran along the blue lake for 2 or 3 miles to the east and found a quiet lakeside to stop. He unloaded the heavy luggage on the back of the big black horse and patted it heavily on the butt. It was rare for the big black horse to have such a good time to relax. It neighed joyfully and dashed into the lake, splashing black mud on its hooves. Then it retreated to the shore at a faster speed, roaring angrily in a low voice. It trembled slightly and kept rolling its thick tongue and turning its lips. It was obvious that it was severely frozen by the cold lake water, and the taste of the salty water was really not good. I have never seen a warhorse that cares about its head and body like you. Ning Ke looked at it funny and pointed to the misty mountain forest not far away. He said, "Idiot, if there is a lake, there will be tributaries. Run over there and see if there is water to drink. Come back early later." The big black horse shook its head discontentedly and stamped its hind hooves to shake off some of the cold lake water on its body. Then it ran in the direction pointed by Ning Quebec. Ning Ke built a clay stove and cooked a pot of fresh vegetable soup. Smelling the gradually rising fragrance, he sat down by the quiet and deserted lakeside. Now there was no Sang Sang to serve him, so he had to serve himself. Fortunately, when Sang Sang was young, he needed to cook for both of them. He was still skilled in cooking and had never forgotten it. In the north of the wilderness, especially in the area between the central plains and the grassland, the northwest wind blew all year round, and it was very cold. He was wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket and a black windbreaker on the outside. He just sat by the lake. He didn't know if it was because of the bowl of warm vegetable soup or because of his cultivation, but he didn't feel too cold. The shallow part of the lake near the shore was very transparent. He could clearly see the white stones at the bottom and the trees that had fallen for hundreds of millions of years. Looking into the distance, the lake became more and more blue. Tied by the mountains and cliffs on both sides, it was long and thin, extending to the depths of the wilderness in the extreme north. Ning Ke sat on the stone and looked at the beautiful lake view in front of him. He thought that yesterday he thought this blue lake looked like a kidney, which was really inelegant. In fact, it should be a woman's slender waist. The slightly swaying lake water was like a melting blue gem, pushing the thin ice condensed by the cold air to the lakeside piece by piece. Some gradually melted and some overlapped. It was believed that as the winter became more and more intense, these thin ice would eventually become thick and hard ice cube. Looking at the thin ice undulating with the lake, Ning Ke thought of the legendary people standing under the ice, and the things that he and Situ Ilan talked about when walking by the lake a few days ago. He could not help but show a self-deprecating emotion on his face. When people in the world reached a certain age, they always had to consider the marriage of men and women. He had never seriously considered it before, and indeed did not have any improper thoughts about Situ. But when he heard that Situ refused General Yunhui, he still felt a little unhappy. Last spring at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, he also had this kind of emotion. At that time, he was very clear that there was absolutely no possibility between him and Li Yu, the princess of Tang Empire. But when Liu left his shoulder and slowly stood up to restore her graceful appearance, there were still many inexplicable emotions in his heart. He scooped up a ladle of lake water and put out the remaining flames in the stone stove. He sat down by the lake again, looking at the thin ice that was more like sugar skin than glass, and said to himself with a slight mockery, "I forgot who said that there are only two kinds of women in the world, your own and others. Are all men like this?" This sentence was said by Liu Xiaohui, but he had always taught Sang Sang to remind himself that anyone who talked about feelings, especially love, was an idiot. So it did not take long for him to be immersed in this self-deprecating emotion. He was awakened by the horrible prospect that he might become an idiot, and began to think about some things that he thought were more meaningful now. He had been in the wilderness of northern Yen Kingdom for more than a month, but he had not seen Xiaoho. Naturally, he could not go to see him on behalf of His Majesty. Although Tuyang City was close, he was really not sure whether he should go or not. He also did not know what would happen if he met Xiaoho now. And although sporadic battles had been happening in the wilderness, the upper level of the Yen Kingdom's reinforcement army knew his identity and sent dozens of elites to protect him. So he could not fight to his heart's content. Was time going to pass like this? As a young man who had survived with great difficulty and lived better and better, Ning Ke was very clear about what he relied on to achieve this. So he would not allow himself to waste too much time. After thinking about meaningless things like men and women by the lake, and thinking about meaningful things like Xiaoho that he could not do anything about, he began to meditate and cultivate. A chilly wind blew from the surface of the lake, shaking the thin ice piled by the shore and the eyelashes on his tightly closed eyes. A slender padao rested on his knees. As he meditated, the invisible qi of heaven and earth gradually gathered around him and then gently covered the blade of the padao. The simple talisman lines engraved on the padao seemed to sense something. The shadow caused by the natural light suddenly became deeper than before, and then began to buzz and vibrate strangely. A piece of dry grass that was blown by the lake wind was bounced into the air as soon as it fell on the surface of the padao. It was instantly torn into hundreds of extremely thin grass by the invisible force, and then fell into the lake and disappeared. The padao across his knees was slightly vibrating, and the clear water between the white round stones by the lake in front of him was also slightly vibrating. The seemingly fragile but actually soft and sticky thin ice gradually shattered and scattered aimlessly along the lake waves, reflecting the sky, as if there were dozens of the same firmament. The big black umbrella, tightly wrapped in coarse cloth, lay silently beside him. After a long time, Ning Ke finished meditating. Looking at the broken ice between the white round stones in front of him, he knew that he would not stay in the no-doubt state for too long and had begun to approach the see-through state. When he was enlightened on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, he quickly broke through the initial state and the perception state and directly entered the no-doubt state. Even he himself did not know how he did it. So now he had no knowledge about cultivation and breaking the realm. At this time, he vaguely felt that he was about to break the realm, but he did not know how to do it. He was a little confused and thought, do I have to go to Tuyang City to send a full character letter to the senior brothers of the academy for advice? As he was thinking about this, he suddenly noticed that the thin ice piled up in front of him was getting more and more. Looking at the distance in front of his right hand, he saw many pieces of thin ice shining like a mirror were slowly flowing over. Having lived in the wilderness of Min Mountain for so many years, he was very familiar with the lakes in the wild. With just a few glances, he knew that there must be a hidden current in the lake, so that these thin ice could be pushed over. But this blue lake, which was as big as a beauty's waist, looked calm. Where did the hidden current come from? Knowing that no barbarians dared to come to this lakeside forest, there should not be any safety issues. He suddenly had the idea of exploring. He stood up, carried the heavy luggage, and moved upstream along the mirror-like thin ice. Going upstream, Was there a beauty on the other side of the water? Walking along the lakeside for about a few miles, he could faintly see that there was a stream of water in front of him that was hitting the peaceful lake like a gem, creating countless beautiful small whirlpools. But the dense forest next to the pass, although the branches and leaves had already fallen, still covered the movement behind the forest, and he could not see the stream. Ning Ke knew that it was the paradise he was looking for. Smelling the faint smell of sulfur coming to his nose, he guessed that there might be a hot spring there, and he could not help but feel happy. Suddenly, a touch of jade white reflected in his eyes, and then a touch of blue flashed, just like this lake. Ning Ke's eyes suddenly showed vigilance, not because of the deep blue reflected in his eyes, but because of other reasons. He pulled the bow and arrow like lightning, aimed at somewhere in the dense forest, and said in a low voice, "Come out." There was a rustling sound in the forest, and a dozen young people slowly walked out. Some of them also aimed at Ning Ke with bows and arrows, but more of them looked at him vigilantly, holding the scabbard in their left hand and the hilt of the long sword outside the scabbard in their right hand. Ning Ke did not care about the sharp arrows aimed at him, but just calmly aimed at the youngest girl among these young people. The boxwood bow in his hand was as steady as a mountain, the string was stretched like a moon, and the arrow was as still as a lake stone. However, it gave people a feeling that as long as he wanted, the quiet arrow on the string would definitely shoot through the girl's chest in the next moment. This feeling was so strong that the nervous expressions of the few young people who aimed at Ning Ke stiffened, and the hands holding the slender long sword hilt turned slightly pale. As for the young girl who was targeted by Ning Ke's bow, her face was even paler, and her slightly bulging chest was violently heaving. A young man bravely jumped in front of the young girl, slightly bent his left knee forward, and took a forward horse stance. His left hand held the scabbard tightly, and his thumb faintly pressed against the ebony edge of the sword, and his right elbow bent backward to lift his wrist. Ning Ke looked at the posture of the young man holding the sword, and then glanced at the clothes and temperament of these young boys and girls. He guessed where they came from, and felt a little relieved. He looked at the young man who was holding the sword and said with a smile, "The cutting arrow style? It's useless against my arrows." The young man was despised by the enemy, and his face suddenly showed anger. "I am a Tang." Ning Ke told them where he came from, and then put down the boxwood bow in his hand. He did not look at these young people who were looking at him anxiously, and put the arrow back into the quiver. Since he had guessed the origin of this group of young boys and girls, he knew that there would be no problem. But because they obviously had no fighting experience, he put down his weapon first, in case they made mistakes because of nervousness. Sure enough, after hearing that he was a Tang, the young boys and girls who were still vigilant a moment ago suddenly became relaxed, and they put down their bows and loosened their sword hilts. "We are the disciples of the Black Ink Garden in the Great River Kingdom. After enduring for 3 days, I finally figured it out, but now I have to pick up my wife, so I will update first today. Tomorrow I will guarantee 6,000 yuan. Continue to ask for recommendation votes, and it will not be in vain. I will ask the second female lead, who is about to appear, to send you childhood photos of her in her crotch. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation votes and monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 200. Because the Li royal family of Chang'an dominated the world, and because of the West Hill Divine Palace, the countries in the Central Plains and the Tang Empire had never been on good terms. Although they were afraid of the Tang Empire's military strength and did not dare to slight it, they did not have a good impression of it. Only the Great River Kingdom was an exception. The Great River Kingdom, located in the south of the mainland, was separated from the Tang Empire by the Great Lake Forest and the vast territory of the South Jin Kingdom. It was extremely difficult for them to communicate with each other. However, it was not known if it was because distance could easily produce beauty. Since many years ago, the Emperor and the people of the Great River Kingdom had always admired the Tang Empire's culture. They ignored the difficult and long traffic road and would send envoys and students every once in a while. The scenery and culture of Chang'an was extremely popular in the Great River Kingdom. The influence of the Tang Empire could be seen in many details of the imperial court's official system and the daily life of the people. The group of boys and girls who appeared by the dense forest beside the blue lake wore light-colored open skirts with wide and gorgeous belt. It was the most popular style of clothing in the Tang Empire. These boys and girls looked calm and gentle, but their eyes were focused and firm. The black sheathed wooden swords on their waists were long and slightly curved, which was the unique Xiu sword of the Great River Kingdom. From these details, Ning Ke quickly concluded that they were from the Great River Kingdom. The people of the two countries, who had been on good terms for generations, had a natural sense of closeness and trust towards each other. They did not believe that the other party would have malice towards him, so he did not hesitate to put down the bow and arrow in his hand. As he expected, when the group of boys and girls knew that he was from the Tang Empire, they quickly showed their kindness and reported their sections. The Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom was the cultivation residence of the Master of Calligrapher, Lord Wang. These boys and girls who appeared in the wilderness of the north of Yen Kingdom were naturally the disciples of the Master of Calligrapher. Most of them were female, and only 3 or 4 were male. The girl who was previously aimed at by Ning Ke with the boxwood bow came forward. She looked at Ning Ke with big curious eyes, as if she had seen something interesting. She asked, "Are you really a Tang?" The girl in a pale pink dress, probably because she was afraid of the cold, wore a furry scarf around her face and neck. With her young face and big bright eyes, she looked particularly cute. Ning Ke replied with a smile, "What's the benefit of pretending to be a Tang?" The girl covered her mouth and smiled. She said, "Except for the Tang merchants in the city, I haven't seen any Tangs from Chang'an City, so I'm a little curious." A woman in her 20s came forward and bowed to Ning Ke apologetically. She took out an identity document issued by the military ministry of Yen Kingdom and asked Ning Ke to take out his own identity document. After all, this was the wilderness, not far from the battlefield. He could not let his guard down just because of Ning Ke's words. He understood Ning Ke's cautiousness very well. He took off his backpack, took out the document issued by Tuyang City, and handed it to Ning Quebec. After confirming that Ning Ke was a Tang, these disciples from the Great River Kingdom's Black Ink Garden suddenly became more relaxed. Those girls looked at him from afar and discussed curiously. The woman sincerely apologized and said, "I didn't know who you were and pointed at you with swords and arrows. It's really rude. Please forgive me." Girls in the Tang Kingdom were known for being straightforward and shrewd. Both Li Yu and Situilan had this kind of character. Ning Ke rarely saw such gentle girls. He glanced at the Black Ink Garden male disciple standing in the distance and thought of the rumor that the Great River Kingdom valued girls more than boys. He could not help but feel a little strange. Since the Great River Kingdom valued girls more than boys, why were these Black Ink Garden female disciples so reasonable and gentle, or even a little too gentle? He smiled and shook his head. "You're too polite. This hot spring was discovered by you first. I'm the uninvited guest. If someone needs to apologize, it should be me." The woman in her 20s hesitated for a moment and said, "You're really a person from the Tang Kingdom. You're gentle and generous. I'm Zhuo Jihua, the 3rd disciple of the Black Ink Garden. If you like this hot spring, why don't?" If it was an ordinary soldier of the Tang Kingdom, the 3rd disciple of the Black Ink Garden would not be so gentle. But this place was not far from Dongxing Stockade Village. The black gown worn by Ning Ke was a farewell gift from Mistress Jian of the House of Red Sleeve. Both the material and the embroidery were first-class skills in the world. How could the women of the Great River Kingdom not understand the clothes of the Tang Kingdom? Just by a glance, they guessed that Ning Ke must have an extraordinary background. Maybe he was one of those academy students who were heard to practice in Dongxing Stockade Village. so their attitude became more gentle and humble. How could it be so? Ninkei said with a smile. I just walked along the lake casually. Occasionally, I found the lake flow was different and guessed that there might be a mountain stream here. I didn't expect it to be a hot spring in advance. You don't need to care about me. Listening to this, the woman's expression was still calm, but she was relieved in her heart. With the respect of the Great River Kingdom to the Tang Kingdom, especially after guessing that Ninkei might have an extraordinary background, she would probably leave with her junior sisters and brothers directly and give this hot spring to Ninkei at other times. But now it was very inconvenient. If that's the case, I won't disturb your quiet cultivation. Zhuo Zhihua saw that he didn't intend to introduce himself, so she didn't take the liberty to ask. She said with a smile and bowed respectfully. Then she led the group of boys and girls into the dense forest. Ninkei looked at the depths of the dense forest and vaguely saw the steam coming from the hot spring. There was also a yellow cloth circle about 1.5 man's height. He thought that the girls of the Great River Kingdom were probably soaking in the hot spring behind that group of cloth circle. No wonder they were so nervous before. If they let other men steal all the spring scenery with their eyes, what should they do? He didn't expect to meet the female disciples of the Great River Kingdom of the Black Ink Garden while walking along the lake. It seemed that today's luck wasn't too bad. He picked up the luggage on the ground, turned around and walked from where he came from. He thought that the scenery of a shallow pool seeping out of a white stone by the lake was not bad, so he planned to meditate and cultivate there. At this moment, there was a sudden sound of footsteps behind him. He turned around curiously. The girl from the Great River Kingdom who had been targeted by his bow and arrow ran over. Because she ran too fast, her tender little face was full of blush, and the furry beast tail on her neck had already spread out, which made her look even more adorable. Ninkei asked, "What's the matter?" The girl opened her big black eyes and stared at Ninkei's cheeks full of gentle expression. Thinking of the calm and indifferent archer just now, she subconsciously scratched her head and asked, "Can you tell me why you aimed at me with a bow and arrow when we came out of the forest together with so many senior brothers and senior sisters? If I say to catch the bandits, first catch the ringleader, will you believe me?" Ninkei replied with a smile. The girl giggled and shook her head. "Of course not. There are so many disciples in the Black Ink Garden, but I have always been the weakest one. And at that time, I didn't have any weapons in my hand. Senior brothers had bows and arrows in their hands, and senior sisters wore shio swords on their waists. You are so strong, so of course you won't regard me as the most threatening one." Ninkei didn't expect that she could think of so many things from that aiming. After a slight shock, he honestly replied, "The reason why I aimed at you was indeed because you were the weakest one in the crowd." Then he added an explanation. "If you can't target the most important person among the enemies, then you should target the one who is the most vulnerable to attack. Then it will be easier to negotiate later." The girl looked at him curiously and asked, "If there was really a misunderstanding at that time, would you really shoot me?" There was no resentment, no anger, just pure curiosity. Ninkei nodded. The girl's dark eyes revealed a surprised emotion. She said, "But will the Tangs also bully the weak? We Tangs are also ordinary people. There are good people and bad people." The girl was puzzled and asked, "But you are not a bad person." Looking at the cute girl who was like a cub, Ninkei couldn't help but reach out and rub her head. He said with a smile, "There is no such thing as good people and bad people on the battlefield, only the dead and the living." After a pause, he looked at her slightly red and tender face. He didn't know if he was affected by those memories, but the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He said seriously, "On the battlefield, either you kill the enemy or the enemy kills you. Little girl, if you don't want to die here, you must remember this." The girl nodded hard. "You chased me just to ask these things?" Ninkei asked. "Yes." The girl smiled like a blooming lotus and blushed slightly. "I also want to tell you that my name is Catgirl." After saying this, she turned around and ran in the direction of the hot spring mountain stream without looking back. Ning-Ke looked at the girl's back and couldn't help laughing. He thought that the names of people from the Great River Kingdom were always very interesting, but he really didn't expect that there would be someone called Cat Girl. This name was really not good, but it was really a good match with the girl's curious eyes and fluffy cuteness. Not long after walking back along the lakeside, he saw a pool seeping out of the white stones on the low shore. The rock layer at the bottom of the clear pool was as clear as a book page. The scenery was good. After making sure that it was far enough and he wouldn't be misunderstood by those girls from the Great River Kingdom behind the yellow cloth, he untied his luggage and sat down. There was still a faint smell of sulfur in the air by the lake. Thinking that the mountain stream was actually a hot spring, and there was no way to drink it, he finally understood why neither the tribes in the wilderness nor the allied forces of the Yen Kingdom chose to camp near this place. The girls from the Great River Kingdom really loved to soak in hot springs as described in the novels. Looking back at the corner of the yellow cloth that was faintly visible in the distance, his right hand fell on the round stone and subconsciously grasped it. This action didn't have any obscene meaning, but he was just recalling the feeling when he rubbed Cat Girl's head. After a while, he realized that it was because he hadn't rubbed Song Song's head for a long time. The scenery around the rock pool was quite beautiful, quiet and pleasant. More importantly, the chi of heaven and earth was abundant. Since there was no way to jump into the mountain stream and bathe with the girls from the Great River Kingdom, Ning-Ke naturally didn't want to give up such a good place for cultivation. The next day, he rode the big black horse to the lakeside again. Sitting in the lake wind, he closed his eyes and meditated quietly. When he opened his eyes, he raised his fingers and gently drew obscure lines in the wind. Only he himself knew that these lines combined to form Fu characters. His eyes moved along with his fingertips in the empty air. When he encountered a difficult juncture, he frowned and thought for a long time. He waved his hand to erase all the Fu characters in his mind, and then continued to draw invisible Fu characters with his fingers. Unconsciously, the sun moved to the middle of the sky, and the slightly cold wind was a little warmer. He untied the collar of his coat, stood up and stretched, loosening his stiff body and slightly sore arms. It was a lazy stretch and a comfortable stretch. His eyes naturally drifted to the front right, and fell on the yellow cloth that was faintly visible in the distant forest stream. Perhaps it was the nature of his body, or perhaps it was the nature of his mind. Anyway, when he looked over there, he even heard the splashing of the stream and the silver bell-like laughter. The girls from the Great River Kingdom really loved to soak in hot springs. He sighed again, thinking that soaking in the hot springs yesterday, today, and every day, even the smoothest and whitest skin would be soaked into a wet white paper. Wouldn't those girls worry about it? Outside the forest stream, several male disciples of the Black Ink Garden vigilantly stood guard, which further proved the rumor that the Great River Kingdom valued women more than men. Ning-Ke couldn't help but think that the former monarch of the Great River Kingdom was a queen. It was said that a woman once disguised as a man and flew to Chang'an City to study, and had some ambiguous stories with the former emperor of the Tang Empire. If the queen had not only had one son, if not for the master of calligrapher, the status of men in the Great River Kingdom would be even more miserable. The hot spring soup was like sheep's milk, and the girls playing like fawns. Such imagination could not fill his stomach after all. Ning-Ke walked away from the stone pool and found a dry place to start cooking. He was going to stew a pot of milky white mutton soup today. "Can you still cook?" Cat Girl appeared by the lake and curiously looked at Ning-Ke, who was lighting the fire with her big eyes. She said, "I heard that men in the Tang Empire don't cook and only eat ready-made food?" Ning-Ke had long known that she had come. Without raising his head, he said, "When I was in Chang'an, I naturally didn't know how to cook. But in this wilderness, there is no other way but to cook by myself." Cat Girl clapped her hands and turned her dark eyes. She squatted beside him and bravely said, "Let me help." Ning Ke saw her face full of hope. Although he didn't trust the cooking skills of this girl from the Great River Kingdom, he still smiled and gave way to her. To his surprise, Cat Girl's cooking skills were extremely skillful at such a young age. It only took her a while to finish all the procedures. Then she washed her hands and waited for the final opening of the pot. Listening to the sound of the boiling soup in the pot and smelling the fragrance of the meat that had begun to overflow, Ning Ke looked at her in surprise. He increasingly didn't understand what kind of existence the women in the Great River Kingdom were. In a society that valued women more than men, how could they have such gentle temperament and skillful cooking skills? Ning Ke opened the lid and handed a bowl of soup to Catgirl. Catgirl smiled. The two sat by the lake in the cold wind, and began to drink the slightly hot soup. Both their bodies and souls became warm. "Is the Great River Kingdom very warm?" "Yes." Catgirl nodded. Looking at the thin ice on the lake, she shivered and said, "I didn't expect the Yen Kingdom to be so cold. The cotton-padded clothes I bought on the way in West Hill seem to be completely unable to withstand the wind. In a few days, when the real winter comes or when you enter the real depths of the wilderness, you will know what a knife-like wind is. Speaking of which, you are so young. Why did you follow senior sisters to the front?" "I am 14 this year." Catgirl opened her big eyes and looked at him in confusion. She asked, "Still young? Is 14 not young?" Catgirl frowned slightly and pouted. She said, "You can get married at 14. How can you be young?" It seemed that the law of the Tang Empire stated that one could only get married at the age of 16. Ning Ke held the soup bowl and looked at the slowly rising hot mist on the lake. He thought that Sang Sang was also 14 this year. Could she get married in the Great River Kingdom? After drinking the mutton soup, Catgirl quickly took off the furry collar around her neck, rolled up her sleeves and washed the bowls, chopsticks, pots and pans, regardless of Ning Ke's objection. Looking at the busy little figure by the lake, Ning Ke naturally thought of Sang Sang again. In the more than a month after leaving Chang and City, he rarely thought of the little handmaiden at home. However, after meeting Catgirl, he thought of Sang Sang more and more often, not knowing whether it was because of their similar age and figure or other reasons. "A small gift to express my gratitude." When Catgirl said goodbye, Ning Ke took out a box of snacks from his bag and handed it to her. Catgirl wanted to refuse, but when she saw the exquisite emblem on the wooden box, her big eyes suddenly lit up and she shouted in surprise, "Is this the osmanthus cake from Chang'an City? Farong's store?" It seems so. The pastries in Ning Ke's bag were all prepared by Mistress Jian, and the snacks prepared by Xiao Chao were undoubtedly Song Song's favorite. He vaguely remembered that it seemed to be the osmanthus cake from some store. Farong's store sells other pastries in the capital city, but we don't have osmanthus cake, because this osmanthus cake is made from the osmanthus outside the Daming Palace. Catgirl was pleasantly surprised and held the box of pastries like holding a treasure. She took out a piece and carefully put it into her mouth to chew, with a very happy and intoxicated smile on her face. Looking at the smile on the little girl's face, Ning Ke was very happy. He remembered that when he brought back pastries for Sang Sang from the House of Red Sleeves last year, she seemed to smile like this. But why did he think of her again? "My love is on the mountainside. It's too high to find her. My love gave me osmanthus cake. What should I give her? Knockout drug?" Ning Ke always felt that he seemed to have read such a poem somewhere, but he couldn't remember the specific year, month and day of this memory. He was only a little uneasy because of the osmanthus cake in the poem. He secretly hoped that the female disciple of the Black Ink Garden would not misunderstand his meaning. Although there were no pear blossoms on his head, he did not want to bully the tender flowers and grass. It turned out that he thought too much, or the disciples of the Black Ink Garden had already planned to deal with this kind of thing. The next day after he gave the osmanthus cake, The female disciple named Zhuo Jihua came with a big pot of stewed fish as a return gift. The stewed fish was really sweet and smooth, and the attitude of the girls of the Great River Kingdom was really gentle. There was nothing wrong with it, which really made people feel flattered. Ning Ke could not eat for free, so he took out a box of pastries from his bag as a return gift. The days gradually passed in the exchange of various stewed pots of the Great River Kingdom and various pastries from Chang'an City. The coldness of the wilderness of the north of Yan Kingdom was getting deeper and deeper. Winter was officially coming. The thin ice on the lakeside gradually melted and condensed, becoming a whole piece like a mirror. Only the ice near the shore of the hot spring lake was still a piece of blue. Although they did not talk too much, and did not even meet too many times, Ning Ke and the girls of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had become familiar with each other. The girls did not ask his origin, the name of his master, and he did not ask why they did not stay in the coalition army camp but chose to come to this wilderness. Winter was coming and the coldness was getting stronger. The hot spring behind the yellow cloth fell along the steep cliff, forming a stream and pool. White steam filled the air, but it was still as warm as spring. Because the temperature inside the cloth was too high, Cat Girl only wore a small clothes-fitting underwear. She sat on the wet stone by the stream, kicking her 2 small feet and holding a few pastries in her hands, happily eating. The light underwear was stuck to the girl's still developing body by the humidity in the air, showing a few slightly bulging curves. She looked at the pool below the warm stream and shouted, "The last 2 pieces of osmanthus cake, you really don't want to eat?" Zhuo Jihua walked to the stream, looked at the direction of the pool, and said with a smile, "Hill Master, have a try." The milky white mist filled the top of the pool, and only a vague figure could be seen. Suddenly a cold wind blew from the depths of the forest, passing through the cloth and blowing the hot mist on the surface of the pool, making it shake uneasily, and the sight became a little clearer. There was a rock sticking out of the water in the pool. A girl sat quietly on the rock, with her back to the stream bank. Her lower body was wrapped in a thin white wet cloth, and her upper body was bare. Her black hair fell like a waterfall on her naked back, and water drops slowly fell from the ends of her hair. "You guys eat." Zhuo Jihua looked at the girl in the pool and said worriedly, "Hill Master, the Allied forces are not willing to pay attention to us at all. Whether it is the logistics or the camp, there are many difficulties. Are we going to stay here forever?" Cat Girl threw the wet hair on her shoulder to the back, walked to the edge of the pool and said angrily, "In my opinion, we might as well go to Dongxing Stockade Village. The general of the Tang Empire will definitely welcome us." Zhuo Jihua rubbed her head and said helplessly, "Although the Great River Empire and the Tang Empire have been on good terms for generations, the disciples of Black Ink Garden came here under the edict of the Divine Hall. Your Majesty doesn't dare to offend the Divine Hall. And don't forget that Master is a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. If we leave the coalition army and go to the Tang camp, we will bring trouble to Master." Cat Girl rolled her dark eyes and said, "Senior sister, why don't we just tell them your identity? When I saw the flower addict, Lu Qinjia, entering the military camp with the Revelation Institute a few days ago, those fellows from the Yen Kingdom and the Yueluan Kingdom were so obedient and respectful. If they knew that you were here, they wouldn't dare to treat us so badly." After a moment of silence, the black-haired girl on the rock in the pond said softly, "There is no need to fight over such trivial matters." One day, Ning Ke came to the lakeside a little earlier than usual. He put down his luggage by the stone pond and thought that the girls of Black Ink Garden should still be resting, so he casually glanced at that place. Then he saw a picturesque scenery. He saw a picturesque painting as beautiful as a scenery. In the dim morning light, a girl stood at the end of the slanting branches extending to the winter lake. The girl was dressed in a light white dress. Her black hair casually tied behind her back like a waterfall. Her bare feet stepped on the thin branches. As the cold wind blew over the lake, the branches swayed up and down gently. Her body also swayed slightly with it. She looked extremely comfortable, as if what came to her face was not the winter wind of the wilderness, but a warm spring breeze. Ning-Ke looked at her quietly and did not make a sound. He subconsciously did not want to destroy this picture. The girl in white standing at the end of the slanting branches seemed to sense his gaze. She gently waved her white sleeves and disappeared behind the yellow cloth in an instant. Only the thin branches were still swaying gently in the lake wind. Ning-Ke looked at the slightly trembling branches and slowly raised his eyebrows. He did not see her face clearly. He only remembered the blue ribbon tied around the waist of her white dress when she left like a ghost. A touch of white dress, like the clouds on the lake. A touch of blue, like the water in the lake. I think it will be interesting to look back at this chapter a year later. I will try my best to satisfy myself. Good night, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 201. The girl in white disappeared behind the cloth and never appeared again. From morning to evening, Ning-Ke turned to look at the direction of the mountain stream from time to time. His neck and eyes began to ache, but he still couldn't see the girl in white. He secretly guessed the identity of the girl, but could only be sure that she was a female disciple of the Black Ink Garden in the Great River Kingdom. He couldn't think of anything else, so he had to resentfully pack up and return to Dongxing Stockade Village. During the time when winter began to cover the wilderness, the situation in the north of Yen Kingdom quietly but clearly changed. The sporadic battles between the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Left King's Palace led to hundreds of cavalry corpses in the wilderness, and also prevented any trade between the two sides. Both sides' determination and bargaining chips had been seen clearly, so the Chanyu of the Left King's Palace unexpectedly sent a messenger to convey his idea of peace to the Central Plains people. As Ning-Ke analyzed, neither the West Hill Divine Palace nor Chang'an City regarded the Left King's Palace as their real enemy, and the Left King's Palace was not so weak that they would be defeated in one blow. Although the barbarian cavalry wandering in the winter grass suffered a great loss from the wilderness people returning to the south, it didn't mean that they were really afraid of the Central Plains people, especially the army of Yen Kingdom on the eastern front. Therefore, after some superficial reprimand and discussion, the Central Plains Coalition Army agreed to the Left King's Chanyu's request for peace. Since the beginning of the negotiation, of course, there must be someone who was responsible for unifying the thinking and leading the negotiation process. General Xiahou naturally couldn't leave Tuyang City to the wilderness to negotiate in person, and the Tang Empire would not allow the West Hill Divine Palace to preside over this matter. After several arguments, the final decision was that everyone should go. The tentative attack and defense in the wilderness had nothing to do with Ning-Ke, and the upcoming negotiation had nothing to do with him. Although the upper level of the Yen army knew that his background was terrible, after all, he didn't have any military identity. In fact, with his current status, there was no harm in representing the Tang army to negotiate. But the counselors in the general's mansion in Tuyang City, just like in the past 2 months, did not dare to let him take the risk in the wilderness. The north wind whistled outside the window, and the room was hot. Ning-Ke was focused on reading by the dim light at the table. The captain glanced at him and said, 3 days ago, someone from Tuyang City disguised as a caravan and left the city. Their direction should be the wilderness. Although the peace talks are about to start, the ban on commerce has not been lifted. I don't know why these people are so anxious. I don't think they are spies from the military camp. As a secret guard of the Empire, the captain followed Ning-Ke's lead after knowing his identity. Logically speaking, a secret guard could only report what he knew and not make any guesses. However, thinking of the strange caravan in Tuyang City, he could not hold back and said tentatively, I heard that General Xiahou is a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. You don't have to sound me out like a woman here. I don't know what His Majesty wants to do. You don't have to know what I'm going to do in the wilderness of the north of Yen Kingdom under His Majesty's secret order. Ning Ke put down the scroll in his hand, looked at him, shook his head and said, "The whole world knows that General Xiahou is a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace, but so what? Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, is also a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. My teacher is the great Divine Priest of the Divine Hall. The people of the Tang Empire also believe in Haotian. Is this a crime?" Looking at the hesitant subordinate, he smiled and waved his hand. He continued, "If General Xiahou wants to see someone from the West Hill Divine Palace, why can't he? Why must he secretly meet in the wilderness of the north of Yen Kingdom during the war? He is not an idiot. Don't think too much. Just continue to help me look after Tuyang City." The captain took the order and left. Ning Ke looked at the weak flame of the oil lamp on the table and slowly frowned. As he said before, the Tangs respected Haotian. However, everyone knew that the Empire and the Divine Hall were two sides of the same coin. Otherwise, why would the South School of Haotian appear? As a general of the Empire, Xiahou was a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did His Majesty tolerate him so much? Why did His Majesty suddenly not trust Xiahou after so many years? If Xiahou really colluded with the West Hill Divine Palace secretly and tried to harm the Empire, what could he do? The most important thing was, what could the Divine Hall give him? With the real arrival of winter, the north of Yen Kingdom ushered in the first snow. Dongxing Stockade Village also ushered in an array tactical master. The array tactical master took the document of the middle military camp and said that because of the cold weather, the middle military camp was worried that the defensive tactical arrays in the frontier fortress defense lines would be damaged. Therefore, he was sent to check and repair them. There were very few cultivators in the world, and talisman masters and array tactical masters were even rarer. No matter in the bustling city or the bitter cold frontier fortress, such people were always respected. Especially on the battlefield, if there was an excellent array tactical master, the military defense line would naturally be more stable. Therefore, the arrival of this array tactical master was warmly welcomed by the generals and ordinary soldiers. The general of Dongxing Stockade Village eagerly welcomed this array tactical master into the tent. He was ready to slaughter sheep and cook cattle to entertain him. Unexpectedly, the array tactical master waved his hand to send away the soldiers who served him. Looking around and no one was around, he asked seriously, "Is Mr. 13 here?" The jet-black waist token seemed to reflect no light. It was dull and dark but not dirty. It was more like a piece of black jade that had been soaked in the ink lake of the great river kingdom for thousands of miles. The two waist tokens slowly approached each other. When they were only a little bit apart, they seemed to be attracted by some kind of suction and automatically stuck together. Those seemingly inconspicuous but actually wonderful secret talismans on them were perfectly wedged together. Ning Ke looked at the waist tokens that were put together and curiously said, "It turns out that there is such a use. The waist tokens of the Imperial Center Administration are all specially made. Even the West Hill Divine Palace is difficult to forge. Therefore, as long as you see the waist token, you can confirm the identity of the holder." The array tactical master from the middle military camp explained a few words to Ning Quebec. Then he stood up and made a deep bow, saying respectfully, "Chu Xianga, the array tactical master of the Imperial Center Administration, greets Your Excellency." Ning Ke looked at the array tactical master's gray hair, and did not want to accept the bow. He quickly helped him up and said, "I am just a non-staff member of the Imperial Center Administration. I am not a lord." The array tactical master looked at the jet-black waist token in his hand. His eyes were full of sighs and smiles. He explained, "Your Excellency, your waist token is not something that a non-staff member can hold in his hand. This waist token has extremely high authority. Except for the Master of Nation and the Chief Officer of the Imperial Center Administration, even the Wayfarer of the South School can't command you. Ning Ke took back the waist token and held it in the air for a long time. However, he did not see anything special about it. He thought that when he entered the palace that day, when His Majesty finally gave him this waist token, he was quite dissatisfied. If this waist token was really as powerful as this person said, he seemed to have wronged His Majesty. Even if we don't talk about the official position of the Imperial Center Administration, I am the 34th generation disciple of the South School of Haotian. You are the successor of Master Yen Sei. According to seniority, you are my grandmaster. Could it be that you want me to kneel down and kowtow to you? Ning Ke smiled and waved his hand. He said, I know that I have a high seniority, but I didn't expect it to be so high. Let's cut to the chase. You must have something important to tell me today. The desolate man went south and forced the tribes of the left king's palace to move south. This matter is not a big deal. So when the Divine Hall issued the edict, the imperial court has been feeling a little strange. Even if they are afraid that the remnants of the devil's doctrine may be revived because of the desolate man, there is no reason to make such a big scene. The apologetic cavalry is not a big deal. It can be explained that the Divine Hall wants to show its power to the believers in the world. But in addition to Prince Longqing, I heard that the Divine Hall has sent more powerful powerhouses. Many spies of the Judicial Department have already sneaked into the wilderness. What do they want to do? The Array Tactical Master looked into Ning Ke's eyes and said seriously, The Imperial Court asked the Imperial Center Administration to investigate the reason why the Divine Hall made such a big fuss. We have mobilized a lot of people, even our fellow disciples in the Divine Hall. Hearing this, Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, The Imperial Center Administration actually has people in the Divine Hall? The Array Tactical Master nodded and explained with a smile, After all, the South School and the Divine Hall are of the same origin. The Divine Hall must have hidden people in the South School. Naturally, the South School can also hide people in the Divine Hall. The people in the South School are naturally our people in the Imperial Center Administration. The explanation is clear enough. Please continue. We spent a month to find out that this matter should be related to the legendary 7 tomes of Arcane. But, sir, I'm sorry that we have no evidence. We just got a piece of cloth. The Array Tactical Master took out a piece of cloth from his sleeve. Judging from the stitches, this piece of cloth should be the hem of a shirt. Then, it was torn by brute force. There were 2 dark red words on the cloth. Ming Scroll. Ning Ke looked at the 2 words on the cloth and frowned. He reached out his hand and gently touched the dark red and black handwriting. He said, This is a blood letter. The Array Tactical Master looked at him and said in a low voice, Our companions in the Divine Hall tried every means to send out this piece of cloth. After that, there was no more news. I guess it must have been discovered. To be able to discover such a big secret in a place like the West Hill Divine Palace and be able to send out this secret, it could be imagined that the spy of the Imperial Center Administration in the West Hill had a high status in the Divine Hall. Ning Ke frowned and looked at the 2 words on the cloth. After a long silence, he said, Based on these 2 words, how can you confirm that it is related to the 7 tomes of Arcane? If it is not, then isn't it a pity that he died? The Array Tactical Master said, after seeing the 2 words on the cloth, no one in the Imperial Center Administration connected it with the legendary 7 tomes of Arcane. Until the Master of Nations saw it, he confirmed that the Ming Scroll was one of the 7 tomes of Arcane. Ning Ke held the cloth in his hand and looked up at his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he asked, Then how can you confirm that the Divine Hall sending powerhouses into the wilderness is related to this matter? Because this Tomes of Arcane is very likely to be with the Desolate, the Array Tactical Master said. Ning Ke asked puzzledly, The Devil's doctrine originated from the Desolate's tribe. Why would the tomes of arcane of the Hautian sect be with the desolate? The array tactical master looked at him with a complicated expression. He was very puzzled that the core disciple of the headmaster of academy, the future master of nation of Tang, did not know the most famous history in the cultivation world. Your Excellency, countless years ago, the desolate occupied the northern part of the continent. They were known as the most powerful country. At that time, the divine hall of Hautian sent the great divine priest of light to the wilderness to preach. They wanted to bring the desolate into the divine light of Hautian. However, no one could have thought that the great divine priest of light, who had exquisite doctrine and high prestige, would enter a different path in the process of preaching to the desolate. He created a cultivation method that was completely different from the right path. Ning Ke rubbed his head and asked incredulously, "Is this cultivation method the kung fu of the devil's doctrine?" Yes. The founder of the devil's doctrine was actually the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace? Ning Ke did not know about this dusty past until today. He could not help but feel shocked. He thought that they were actually a family after all. The array tactical master continued, "The great divine priest of light was excellent in learning and strict in teaching. He was best at enlightening ordinary people. Back then, the divine hall had great expectations for him to preach in the wilderness. They even let him bring a tomes of arcane. When he founded the devil's doctrine and became the enemy of the divine hall, this tomes of arcane was naturally left in the wilderness and never appeared in the central plains again. Decades ago, the sects of the devil's doctrine hidden in the central plains were all wiped out by the right path of the central plains. Even the mysterious front gate of the devil's doctrine was said to have been chopped into ruins by a senior sublime being with a single sword. However, no one has found the tomes of arcane. Breaking into the mountain with a single sword and chopping the front gate of the devil's doctrine into ruins. Listening to the deeds of the senior sublime being, Ning Ke seemed to have seen the scenes of the past. He was excited and his skin was slightly numb. However, he did not know why he faintly felt that the senior sublime being had something to do with him, or at least with the academy. Who is that senior sublime being? I don't know. Since even the front gate of the devil's doctrine does not have the tomes of arcane, then there is only one possibility. It has been taken to the cold region of the far north by the desolate as early as 1,000 years ago. The cold region of the far north is bitterly cold and far away. Moreover, the desolate are very strong. Even the grand cultivators of the knowing destiny state dare not set foot there. Therefore, this guess has always been a guess. However, now that the desolate have moved south from the cold region of the far north, the divine hall will certainly find the tomes of arcane. Hearing this, Ning Ke finally understood why the imperial court made such a judgment about the intention of the divine hall. He also believed that the West Hill Divine Palace would not hesitate to start a bloody war in order to get the tomes of arcane that had been lost for thousands of years. They would not hesitate to let thousands of people bleed and sacrifice. They would even not hesitate to let Prince Long Qing and even more important people take risks. From the emperor to the peddlers, everyone in the world knew that the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane were the most sacred classics of Hautian Taoism. However, almost no one knew what the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane were or what was recorded in them. There were many legends about the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. Some said that the tomes of arcane recorded the will of Hautian to the human world. Some said that the tomes of arcane recorded the prophecies of the world. Some said that the tomes of arcane itself was a supreme instrument that condensed the power of heaven and earth. There were also rumors that mortals could cultivate by just looking at the tomes of arcane, cultivators could break through the realm by just looking at the tomes of arcane, ghosts in the underworld could be purified and reborn by just looking at the tomes of arcane, and saints could become immortals by just looking at the tomes of arcane. Ning Ke had heard of these legends. However, at that time, his life was too far away from the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. He did not care at all, and even somewhat did not believe in the existence of the tomes of Arcane. Today, he finally knew that the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane were real. However, he still did not believe those rumors. He felt that the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane were more likely to be the secret of Hautian Taoism, some kind of earth-shattering unique cultivation method. At this time, he did not know that his name had appeared in the first volume of the tomes of Arcane. The tomes of Arcane are very important and everyone wants them. However, what does this have to do with me? After all, he was a disciple of the second floor of the academy. Although his state was still too weak, he was more or less tainted with the obsession and pride of his senior brothers and senior sisters at the back of the mountain. Ning Ke was not shocked by the name of the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane for too long. He soon sobered up and looked at the Array Tactical Master and asked. The Array Tactical Master glanced out of the window and whispered in his ear, "The Nation Master asked me to tell you that it is very difficult to find the tomes of Arcane in the wilderness. Ordinary cultivators have no power in front of the Divine Hall. After all, he and Master Yen Sei are the great divine priests of the Divine Hall, so it is not convenient for them to do anything. However, you happen to be in the north of Yen Kingdom, so this matter falls on my head?" Ning Ke stared at him and asked. "Exactly. Even this corner of the cloth with the bloody words written on it was personally ordered by the Nation Master. He specially sent someone to bring it from Chang and for you to see." Ning Ke stared at the snowflakes floating outside the window, and was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he asked, "What does the tomes of Arcane look like?" The Array Tactical Master replied respectfully, "I don't know." Ning Ke's eyes fell on his face and continued to ask, "How big or small?" The Array Tactical Master answered honestly, "I don't know." Ning Ke's eyebrows twitched slightly. He forcibly suppressed his emotions and asked again, "Which volume did the Divine Hall lose?" The Array Tactical Master shook his head and said, "I still don't know." Then he pointed to the corner of the cloth in Ning Ke's hand and said, "It should be the Ming volume." Ning Ke held the corner of the cloth and looked at it. He frowned and asked, "Ming volume, which volume is it?" The Array Tactical Master coughed and looked at him carefully and said, "I told you before, but I don't know." Ning Ke said angrily, "If you don't know anything, how can I find it?" The Array Tactical Master looked at him innocently and said slowly, "I heard that even the Divine Hall is not qualified to worship the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane. The tomes of Arcane come from the unknown place. How can an ordinary person like me know?" Ning Ke's frown deepened when he heard the words, "unknown place." He thought of the fact that Chen Pippi had already revealed half of his chubby face and the occasional words he heard in the academy. He felt that this matter was really troublesome. "Sir, you are the future Nation Master of the Tang Empire and the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. You cultivate in the back mountain of the academy every day and know much more than me. You should know better than me what the tomes of Arcane look like." Ning Ke was stunned. He thought that he had been busy cultivating and shooting arrows in the back mountain of the academy all day, so he had no time to pay attention to the top legends of the cultivation world. He also had no chance to ask his senior brothers and sisters about their stories. Did he have to tell him such things? After the Array Tactical Master left, Ning Ke sat by the window and looked at the wind and snow coming from the wilderness. He thought for a long time. It was not until today that he realized that he had underestimated himself after entering the second floor of the academy. He did not expect that even the legendary items like the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane had begun to have a connection with him. If he had known, he would have used the crab porridge to lure Chen Pippi to tell him about his past and ask about the secrets of the unknown place and the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane. Suddenly, he remembered that the general's mansion of Tuyang City had sent people disguised as a caravan to enter the wilderness. He slowly frowned. Could it be that Xiaohou also wanted to get the volume of the tomes of arcane that had been lost for thousands of years? If so, it seemed that no matter how difficult it would be, he had to plan well after entering the wilderness. Last night I inexplicably caught a cold and rhinitis. Today I was in a daze and worked very hard to write. Then, in the afternoon, I found out that 72 was sick. His illness is much more troublesome than mine. I became another poor person after the white bird. My heart could not help but feel heavy. I wish everyone good health and happiness for the whole family. I will not rest tomorrow, but I don't know how much I can write. Just try your best. Today's recommendation votes are very fierce. I am very gratified. It is this gratification that forced me not to lie on the bed like a corpse. Please continue to vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 202. From his previous life to this life, Ning Ke grew up soaked in blood and rotten flesh. He did not have any excessive moral cleanliness in his bones. In order to achieve his goals, he would do anything. Therefore, he never thought that he would break into the camp alone and die spitting blood everywhere when he could not even shake Xiaohou, the ruthless deity. That seemed to be hot-blooded and glorious, but in his eyes, it was just an idiotic behavior of abandoning oneself to despair. If you died in style, Xiaohou would still be sitting at the table, and maybe he would even use your head as a wine cup. At that time you, who had turned into bones, could only stare at him with your dark eye sockets and could not hurt him at all. But it didn't mean that the clear understanding of Xiaohou's powerful strength would make him timid. He had been secretly watching the general with outstanding military exploits, carefully looking for the opponent's loopholes, pondering the various details of the battle in the future, and even unscrupulously thinking about how to drag second brother and Chen Pippi into the mud. According to his analysis, Xiaohou was at the peak of martial arts, which was equal to the knowing destiny state. Second brother and Chen Pippi, who were at the knowing destiny state, together with himself, could definitely kill Xiaohou. What he needed to think about was how to tie these two senior brothers to his belt and let them join him in this vigorous cause. However, before he figured out how to use the academy to deal with Xiaohou, he heard the news that one of the 7 tomes of arcane was lost in the wilderness. Thinking of the caravan that secretly sneaked out of Tuyang City, he felt slightly anxious. If Xiaohou really got that tomes of arcane and broke through the realm as easily as rumored, who could beat him? He opened the window and looked at the gradually heavier wind and snow outside. Thinking of the irreconcilable hatred between himself and Xiaohou and the hatred left by Darky on his shoulder, he shook his head and said, "I can't allow this to happen." Although more than 100,000 reinforcements from various countries gathered at the border of northern Yan Kingdom, including young powerhouses from Yueluan Kingdom's White Tower, South Jin Kingdom's Sword Garret, and Great River Kingdom's Black Ink Garden, the only one who was really qualified to compete with the judicial department of the Divine Hall for the tomes of arcane was this powerful general who had fought at the border for many years. Of course, this was under the condition that the Tang Empire and the Academy did not officially take action. Ning Ke said to himself, "His Majesty suspects that Xiaohou will collude with the Divine Hall as a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. Will Xiaohou have a conflict with the Divine Hall for this tome of arcane? What can you make of it?" It was impossible for him to come up with a real solution by looking at the snow and admiring the scenery, but he was becoming more and more determined. Now the wilderness must be full of powerhouses. The judicial department of the Divine Hall, Prince Long Qing, and even the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, who even Chen Pippi was afraid of, might be in the wilderness. With his current no-doubt state, even if he went there, it seemed that he would not be of any use, but he still had to go. He crossed the river by feeling the stones and stepped on the winter grass to enter the plain. He made the appropriate measures according to the situation. As long as Xia Ho did not get the Tome of Arcane, he was even willing to help the West Hill Divine Palace and even burn the Tome of Arcane. Since he had nothing to do, he closed the window, took off his clothes and got into the warm quilt. It was a great pity that the erotic novel he took in the cliff cave of the academy did not bring coldness to the boarder. Lying on his side on the warm and hard brick bed, he thought about the matter of going to the wilderness and the annoyance of not having a quilt to tuck in. After tossing and turning for a while, he fell asleep. The wind and snow outside the house became heavier and lasted for a whole night. When Ning Kei woke up the next morning, the sky, which was supposed to be dim, had already become extremely bright and easily pierced through the window into the house. He rubbed his eyes and walked to the window. He pushed the window open and saw a snow-white world between heaven and earth, which was so clean and bright that it made his heart palpitate. The lakeside had long been frozen, but the lake in the distance was not completely frozen. The ice floating on the surface of the water carried the white snow that fell last night, looking like a group of fluffy white grass, beautiful and somewhat lovely. The slanting branches and leaves of the lakeside carried the snow, as if someone had woven a shabby white towel for a giraffe. Hot mist sprayed out from the nostrils of the big black horse, and the horse's hooves stepped on the snow by the lakeside, leaving a messy abstract painting. Ning Kei rode on the back of the horse and looked at the blue sea covered with winter snow, feeling refreshed and comfortable. When he came to the side of the stone pool where he had been meditating these days, he found that the water that seeped into the pool from the lake had long been frozen into a piece of transparent jade. There was not a single snowflake on it, and it looked very clean. He stretched out his hand in the air to feel the wind, and understood that it was because the north wind had become stronger. Just as he was thinking about this, a few muffled sounds suddenly came from the wind, which seemed to be the sound of metal and some kind of hard wood colliding. He stepped on the horse's pedal and straightened his body to look at the source of the sound. He saw that the yellow cloth around the hot spring was still the same, but between the snow forest, he could faintly see the strong wind splashing and two figures fighting. Ning Kei naturally had his own reasons for coming to the lakeside today, even though he had already decided to go deep into the wilderness. This reason had something to do with the women from the Great River Kingdom beside the hot spring. However, he had not decided on what exactly to plan, and did not expect to see such a scene in advance. Stepping on the horse's pedal, his line of sight was naturally much clearer, and he could clearly see what was going on there. Zhuo Zhihua stood up with difficulty with the help of her junior sister. A stream of blood slowly flowed down from the corner of her mouth, dripping on the snow that was full of messy footprints under her, making a popping sound. Not far in front of her, there was an ascetic monk wearing a bamboo hat. Even in such a cold weather, the monk was still barefoot. His right thumb slowly played the prayer beads, and his left hand held an iron staff, the head of which was deep into the snow. Zhuo Zhihua was the third disciple of Black Ink Garden, and had the most profound skills among the group of boys and girls. However, she was still no match for this ascetic monk. Thinking of the cold treatment she had suffered in the Yen Kingdom these days and the humiliation today, she stared at him and said sternly, "You let us live in the wettest and coldest place in the military camp. We had no choice but to leave the military camp and hide in the wilderness. Are you still not satisfied?" The ascetic monk slowly raised his head. The bamboo hat covered the upper half of his face, and the lower half that was exposed was cold and emotionless. The distribution of the camp is the matter of the Yen Kingdom's general. What does it have to do with our Yueluan Kingdom? Zhuo Zhihua lifted her sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth and asked, "Then why do you still want this hot spring? You have used this hot spring for so many days. It should be enough." The ascetic monk from the Yueluan Kingdom gave a simple and rude reason. Obviously, he only cared about driving the boys and girls from the Great River Kingdom away from the hot spring, and did not care about any reason. Everything has to be reasonable. Zhuo Zhihua looked down slightly, and her hands once again grasped the slender Xiao sword at her waist. She said in a low voice, "First come, first served. Even a 3-year-old child knows that. Don't you know that?" The ascetic monk replied indifferently, "I am a monk, and I don't know about worldly affairs." Zhuozhihua adjusted her breathing, and then raised her head. A trace of determination flashed in her bright eyes. The ascetic monk noticed that she was preparing to draw her sword, and knew that she might use the ultimate move of Black Ink Garden. He frowned slightly and said unhappily, "We are all righteous people. Do we have to fight to the death? To tell you the truth, this hot spring is for my aunt and the princess. You'd better get out of the way." Hearing the words aunt and princess, the determination in Zhuozhihua's eyes suddenly disappeared, and she subconsciously turned her head to look at the yellow cloth. The girls of Black Ink Garden behind her also became even more silent. The aunt that the monk from the White Tower Temple of the Ueluan Kingdom mentioned was naturally Aunt Kunimati, who had a high state but was unreasonable. The princess he mentioned was naturally one of the 3 famous addicts in the world, Flower Addict Luchinjia. So what if she is Flower Addict Luchinjia? Can she just rob someone else's place? Cat Girl shouted loudly. Because of the cold weather, her cheeks were slightly red, and her face was covered with more furry fur, which made her look very cute. Even if she reprimanded the other party, it would only make people want to laugh. However, the monk from the White Tower Temple could not laugh. Hearing this girl mention the princess who was deeply loved and respected by the monks of the Ueluan Kingdom, his face under the shadow of the bamboo hat became even more gloomy. "Patroness, be careful of the trouble that comes from the mouth." Cat Girl snorted coldly, walked to Zhuozhihua and said, "Senior sister, take a break." After saying this, she took off her shoes and slowly walked forward, holding the long sword at her waist tightly. She looked at the ascetic monk and said in a clear voice, "Cat Girl of Black Ink Garden, please enlighten me, master." When she held the ebony handle of the sword with both hands, the cute expression on the girl's face disappeared, leaving only silence and sternness. Her white socks stepped on the white snow, making a slight squeaking sound, giving the audience a very strange feeling. The ascetic monk's expression was slightly dignified. He stretched out his right hand, and the string of black prayer beads slowly rotated. "Kill!" A sharp and clear voice burst out from Cat Girl's cute little mouth. A light cyan luster flashed through the snow forest, and the sword was instantly pulled out from the sheath at her waist. With an indomitable momentum, she carried her small body and instantly crossed the distance between the two of them. Accompanied by the whistling sword chi, she slashed towards the monk's body. The ascetic monk was caught off guard, and with a muffled groan, he retreated. His bare black feet kicked up countless snowballs mixed with grass roots on the snow, and the string of black prayer beads in his right hand flew to his chest and rotated with a whistling sound. The cyan luster disappeared as soon as it appeared. The ascetic monk reached out to grab the black prayer beads, and scratches appeared on the surface of the hard prayer beads. The cotton monk's robe on his body was cut open by the sword edge, and the cotton split open, revealing a faint bloodstain. If Cat Girl's sword had gone deeper, the monk would have been cut open and died on the spot. Cat Girl maintained the posture of half squatting and holding the sword. Her chest rose and fell slightly, her face was slightly red, and she gasped softly. Her bright eyes were full of excitement. This was the first time she had fought with someone, and she didn't expect to win. The ascetic monk looked down at the sword mark on his chest, and his stone-like jaw trembled slightly in shock and anger. He stared coldly at Cat Girl and said in a cold voice, "A little girl who has just entered the no-doubt state is so cruel." Cat Girl's previous slash against the snow was the sword-drawing movement of the Great River sect, which focused on being mysterious and decisive, leaving no chance for the enemy to fight back. However, in the monk's view, such a sudden move was no different from a sneak attack. If it wasn't a sneak attack, how could she hurt him? The monk of the Ueluan Kingdom chanted the name of Buddha and used his psyche power. The chi of heaven and earth around him began to gather, and the dead leaves and snow in the snow forest began to flutter. The string of black prayer beads in his hand whistled and flew toward Catgirl's little face. Catgirl felt the strong wind blowing on her face, and looked at the black prayer beads approaching her in an instant. Her reaction was obviously slower than before. After all, it was the first time for a little girl to fight. She thought that since she had won a sword strike from her opponent and had shown mercy, the battle was over. She didn't expect that her opponent would start to attack again. At this critical moment, her body instinctively made the most appropriate response after practicing drawing the sword day after day by the Ink Lake at the foot of Mogan Mountain. With another childish cry, White Socks stepped on the white snow and moved backward. She turned her hands over, and the slender sword hanging in the air around her waist was lifted up and chopped toward the prayer beads. However, the string of prayer beads, which was whistling and rotating at a high speed, suddenly changed shape in the air, avoided the sharp blade, and then turned back to cover the blade in Catgirl's hand. The prayer beads covered the bright blade, and a powerful force passed down, making Catgirl unable to move her sword at all. She could only watch helplessly as the ascetic monk's iron staff, which had been held in his left hand, smashed down on her head. "Buddha is merciful," the ascetic monk shouted sternly. Catgirl couldn't move the prayer beads no matter how hard she tried. She could only let the shadow of the staff cover her red little face. In the snow forest, the girls of the great river kingdom screamed, but it was too late to help. In the yellow cloth near the warm stream, a right hand holding a brush paused slightly, as if preparing to do something. At this moment, the whistling sound of an arrow suddenly broke through the lakeside. A shadow of an arrow came from outside the forest like a flash of lightning. It flew close to Catgirl's slender sword and accurately shot the string of black prayer beads in a very small space. In the buzzing sound, the arrow shot the black prayer beads out of the sword and into a big tree. The tail of the arrow kept trembling, and the black prayer beads that were nailed in the arrowhead trembled even more violently, but they couldn't escape at all. The sudden change shocked everyone. Catgirl's sword suddenly regained freedom. With the last sword momentum, she forcibly flipped over and blocked the iron staff that was attacking her little face. The heavy tip of the staff smashed beside her, splashing countless mud and snow. The ascetic monk of the Ueluan kingdom didn't look back, but he could feel the attack on his prayer beads of life. He was extremely vigilant. However, the monk, who was used to fighting, ignored the hidden enemy. With a roar, he held the staff with both hands and smashed it on the girl again. Countless footprints appeared on the snowy ground in the forest, and each footprint created a snowflake. A figure suddenly appeared, and a cool blade light rose from the monk's staff. The chill instantly invaded the monk's fingers, and it seemed to be even colder than the winter wind in the wilderness. The monk resolutely abandoned the staff and retreated. The blade did not retreat, but moved forward, breaking his sleeve, cutting his shoulder, and finally resting on the monk's throat coldly. The monk's hands hung down, and he didn't dare to move. Ning Ke held the slender padao, looked at the monk under the knife, and said, "Master doesn't seem to know mercy. I'm really sick and annoyed. It's too hard to write today. If I can't stand it tomorrow, I'll ask for leave. If I can stand it, I'll write." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 203. The monk of the Ueluan kingdom wanted to smash the lovely Catgirl into a pulp with his iron staff, and still shouted, "Buddha is merciful." Therefore, Ning Ke put the long and thin padao on the monk's neck and said, "Master, you don't seem to know mercy." The skin on the monk's neck trembled slightly because of the coldness on the blade. He looked at Ning Ke's clothes with alarm and asked in a hoarse voice, "Tang?" Ning Ke nodded. The monk forced himself to calm down and looked at him through the long and thin blade. He said, "This is a sneak attack." Ning Ke didn't look at him, but at the snowflakes falling slowly on the blade. He said, "You have the final say." The monk didn't expect his answer to be like this, and didn't know how to answer. His slightly dark cheeks under the bamboo hat were stiff because of shame and anger. He said in a low voice, "Unreasonable?" Ning-Ke looked at him and smiled. He said, "I didn't see you being reasonable just now." The monk was speechless. Ning-Ke looked at the face under the shadow of the bamboo hat and suddenly asked, "How do you think we should end this?" The monk's eyes under the bamboo hat brightened slightly. He looked at him and said, "I'm not convinced. Let's fight again." Catgirl, who was closest to them, heard the monk's words. She blushed and sneered angrily. "Do you have any shame? It was you who sneak attacked me just now, but you say we sneak attacked you. Why should we fight with you?" Ning-Ke didn't seem to hear her words. He slowly moved the padao on the monk's throat and fell on the thick snow. He dragged the padao backward and kept a distance from the monk. The monk looked at him in silence, and then raised his right hand to take off the bamboo hat on his head, revealing his bald head wrapped in green cloth and his indifferent and vigilant eyes. He didn't know who this young Tang man was, and he couldn't see his state. There were only two possibilities. The young Tang man's state was much higher than his, or he was not a cultivator. Could he enter the see-through state at such a young age? The monk thought that the possibility was too small. Moreover, he saw that Ning-Ke's archery was as sharp as a god's and his bladesmanship was sharp, but he did not use any cultivator's skills. He was even more certain that Ning-Ke was an ordinary person. If he was an ordinary person, how could he defeat him again when he was a cultivator who was well prepared? The monk from the Ueluan kingdom stared at Ning-Ke, who was not far away, and took a deep breath. His naked black feet slowly sank into the snow, and the melted water around his feet spread out. The black prayer beads that were nailed to the tree by the feathered arrow trembled violently, and then forcibly broke free from the arrowhead and flew back to him. His right hand grabbed the prayer beads in front of him. "Please." The monk looked at Ning-Ke with a solemn expression. A moment later, a ferocious look suddenly appeared on his face. The jet-black prayer beads whistled through the air. After the prayer beads, the iron staff smashed towards Ning-Ke's body with a thunderous boom. In the snow forest, grass, withered leaves, and snow were flying everywhere. The chi of heaven and earth was restless, as if it was about to explode. Ning-Ke held the thin hilt of the padao with both hands. The engravings on the hilt were densely entwined with straw ropes that were used to absorb sweat. His fingertips felt the most familiar touch of velvet grass. He stared at the iron staff that broke through the wind with the snow and the string of jet-black prayer beads that were whistling and circling. There was no expression on his face. Just as the string of prayer beads increased its speed to the extreme and was about to disappear from his sight, he bent his knees slightly and bounced up like a snow fox that was used to hunting in the snowfield. He followed an extremely low curve and moved forward against the snow. The distance between them was quickly shortened. He flipped his hands and lifted the slender padao from below, flicking off the snowflakes and grass in front of the blade. The sharp tip accurately hit the string of prayer beads that were whistling and circling towards the blade. Accompanied by a sharp grinding sound that made one's teeth ache, the sharp tip of the blade forcibly stopped the rotation of the prayer beads. Immediately after, Ning-Ke's wrist moved again and the padao shook, directly flicking the prayer beads away from his body. The prayer beads whimpered and flew diagonally away, falling into some unknown snow. The monk's dark cheeks suddenly turned pale. He could no longer find any trace of the natal prayer beads in his sense of perception. He had suffered a hidden injury. Ning-Ke's attack was effective. How could he be soft-hearted? He took a step forward and the slender padao was naturally dragged behind him. He suddenly exerted strength from his waist and abdomen, holding the hilt with both hands and using all his strength to chop forward. The blade cut through the slowly falling snowflakes in the air. The iron staff that was like a gray shadow flying towards his face was cut off. A thunderous sound rang out. A soft hiss. The monk's cotton robe that had already been split open suddenly had a deeper cut. Fresh blood stained the torn cotton. His right foot accurately stepped on the monk's knee. Then he turned his wrist, and the slender padao flipped in the air. The back of the padao fiercely chopped the monk's throat, stifling the scream that was about to come out. The monk of Ueluan Kingdom knelt on one knee with a thud. Blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. Together with the deep cut on his cotton robe on his chest, he looked really terrible and miserable. But in fact, Ning Ke had a good sense of propriety. The monk's life was not in danger at all. However, when he felt the coldness on his neck again, his dark cheeks had already become extremely pale. Shock, fear, and confusion kept changing in the monk's eyes. He did not understand and could not understand what had happened at that moment. Why could an ordinary person like Ning Ke pick up his natal prayer beads and force him into such a desperate and miserable situation? In a moment, the winner was decided again. Looking at the monk kneeling in the snow with blood, the female disciples of Great River Kingdom Black Ink Garden covered their mouths. They did not sympathize with the abominable monk of Ueluan Kingdom. They just did not expect that the seemingly ordinary slender padao could pick up the prayer beads, the snow, the iron staff, the monk's robe, and even the monk's throat without giving the monk any chance to fight back. The most shocking and confusing scene was the same as the one that made the monk confused and cold. Why could the young Tang's blade pick up the black prayer beads? It had nothing to do with the bladesmanship. The natal prayer beads of Buddhism sect cultivators were like the flying swords of sword masters. They were so fast that the naked eye could not capture their flying trajectory. If one could not see it and could not predict how it would fly, then even the best bladesmanship in the world could not pick it up. But the young Tang did it. The reason why the arrow outside the forest could hit the prayer beads could be explained that Cat Girl was fighting with the monks of Ueluan Kingdom at that time, and the prayer beads were fixed on the Daishio sword. But what about this time? Ning Ke held the hilt with one hand and looked at the monk of Ueluan Kingdom who was half kneeling under the blade. He shook his head and said, "You insisted on fighting the second round. Don't blame me. We are all righteous people. Why do we have to fight to the death?" This was what the monk of the Ueluan Kingdom had said before, after he had injured Zhuo Zhihua, the third disciple of the Black Ink Garden. At this time, Ning Ke had knocked down the monk and returned these words to him. The girls of the Great River Kingdom behind him felt extremely relieved. The monk looked up at Ning Ke and asked hoarsely, "I admit defeat. May I know your name?" Ning Ke was very satisfied that there was only fear and confusion in his eyes instead of hatred. But he was not satisfied with the question that sounded like a martial arts novel. He frowned and said, "Why do you want to know my name? Do you want to get revenge in the future?" "I don't dare." The monk coughed twice and lifted his sleeve to wipe the blood from his lips. He said, "But when the elders ask me when I go back, I can't say that I lost to a nameless Tang." Ning Ke was silent, as if he was thinking about whether he should tell the name of his sect. The monk of Ueluan Kingdom waited in silence. The girls of Great River Kingdom also waited curiously for the answer. Even the hand of the girl behind the yellow cloth gently placed the brush on the inkstone. Ning Ke said, "If the elders of White Tower Temple ask, you can say that the person who defeated you is Zhong Dajuan of the Academy." Hearing the word, academy, the monk of Ueluan Kingdom's stiff body trembled slightly. His voice also trembled slightly. He said, "Oh, you are from the Academy. I am really rude. You asked about my sect. You must be thinking of using Ueluan Kingdom's White Tower Temple or even the Divine Hall to suppress me." Ning Ke looked at the green cloth wrapped around the monk's bald head and said, "But unfortunately, I am a student of the Academy. I think everyone agrees that there is no place in this world that can suppress the Academy." The body of the monk of Ueluan Kingdom trembled even more and he said, "I dare not have such an idea. It doesn't matter if there is or not. Our academy has always been the most reasonable place. Our first lesson is etiquette. So when we see things that are unreasonable, we can't help but intervene. A monk who has just entered the no-doubt state dares to be so cruel and merciless? What's so great about being a love-struck fool? Can you rob someone else's place? Cuny Maddie, is this the name? You have to follow the rules. While Ning Ke was educating the monk under the knife, he thought of the words of Professor Chao Jifeng and second brother. The professor said that the rules of the academy were very simple. Whoever had the bigger fist set the rules. Obeying the rules was etiquette. Second brother's request for him on the trip to the wilderness was very simple. No matter what situation he was in, he must not lose the face of the academy. In other words, he could only bully others and not be bullied by anyone. In fact, these words had been said by the girls of the Great River Kingdom before. He just repeated them. However, the power of words was naturally completely different when the meat was on the board and the knife was on the neck. The monk of Ueluan Kingdom did not dare to have any doubts. He just listened obediently for fear that the hot-blooded student of the academy would shake his hand and leave another wound on his neck. Get out of here. Don't come again. Ning Ke moved the padao away and said to the monk. However, in his heart, he said to the proud senior brothers and sisters in the distant mountain in the south of Chang, An city and the proud big white goose, youngest brother, I didn't lose the face of the academy. Now I have started to bully others. Thank you for your help, senior brother. You're welcome. Ning Ke did not have the habit and hobby of traveling in Jianghu with a prestigious sect. He stopped Zhuo Jihua from bowing and said directly, the name of the academy can't conquer the world. Even if the White Tower Temple is afraid of it, it can still cause you trouble. Be careful. Cat Girl frowned and said unhappily, Senior brother, why did you give that guy a second chance to fight? What if you couldn't pick the rosary? Zhuo Jihua thought that senior brother Zhong was kind enough to help them. How could junior sister blame him? She was worried that he would be unhappy, so she smiled apologetically and said, that monk should be a second-generation disciple of Ueluan Kingdom. I didn't expect him to be defeated by senior brother Zhong. I think senior brother should be one of the best in the academy. The smile on Ning Ke's face was a bit forced. He thought to himself that he was used to hiding his true identity. If he made a name for Zhong Dajuan in the future, it would be too late for him to cry. Ning Ke led the big black horse away from the warm stream and walked slowly along the lakeside. The snowflakes in the air were denser than before. He quietly looked at the snowy lake and kept analyzing the battle today in his mind. The spirit of chivalry, demeanor, and glory had always been dirty air discharged from the human body. They were meaningless to him. The reason why he gave the Ueluan Kingdom monk a second chance was not that he wanted to beat him until he was convinced, but that he needed an opponent to test his knife and to experiment with the new fighting style that he had figured out these days. His compatriots in the Tang military camp definitely could not do it because they could not be ruthless. A real powerhouse like Prince Long Qing definitely could not do it, because it was very likely that he would be killed by his opponent. The White Tower Temple monk that he met today was in the middle state of no doubt state and was the most suitable opponent. He was so suitable that his hands began to tremble with excitement when he held the hilt of his knife. He made 2 strikes in the battle. His speed and precise control of strength had been greatly improved compared to when he was in the city of Wei. But the key point was that he did not use any cultivation methods. He could deal with an opponent at the level of the White Tower Temple monk without any cultivation method. This was the basis of the fighting style that he wanted to try. On a rainy night in the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Chao Xiaoshu's sword filled with water had killed countless Chong and gangsters. At the entrance of the northern mountain road, the dim sword shadow of the Devil's Doctrine sword master had caused the most elite bodyguards of the Tang Empire to suffer heavy casualties. Compared with ordinary warriors, cultivators always seemed extremely powerful and difficult to defeat. In Ning Ke's view, the main reason was that cultivators used their psyche power to control the qi of heaven and earth. Their natal flying swords or other weapons were much faster than ordinary martial arts skills in the world. Moreover, their trajectory was unpredictable. But this was not a problem for him who had entered the world of cultivation. Although he had only opened 10 acupoints and was extremely poor in aptitude, he could control very little chi of heaven and earth. If he fought with an enemy with a flying sword, he could not gain the upper hand in speed and power. But he was extremely sensitive and could clearly perceive the slightest change in the surrounding chi of heaven and earth. The trace of unnatural change in the chi of heaven and earth could not be captured by all cultivators. Ning Ke was trying to capture it. As long as he could capture it, then he could know when the enemy cultivator would make a move and how the opponent's natal item worked. Today he succeeded. So when the Ueluan Kingdom monk's prayer beads whistled, the trajectory could not be seen by the naked eye. But in his sense of perception, it was extremely clear and extremely slow. Mastering the trajectory of the enemy's natal item was only the first step. In this kind of fighting style, Ning Ke needed to shorten the distance between him and the opponent in the shortest time possible and drag the opponent into close combat. Just like what he said to Situelon that day. In his view, most cultivators in the world were immersed in meditation and flying sword. They could be magicians, but they did not know how to be executioners. And except for the powerhouses at the peak state of martial arts and the masters of the devil's doctrine, all the cultivators in the world had a fatal problem. Their bodies and abilities were too weak. Without a strong bodyguard, there was only a road to death when approached by a guy like Ning Ke who had sharp bladesmanship and was used to seeing life and death. The reason why Ning Ke pondered this kind of fighting style was related to his own aptitude in cultivation. Before becoming a divine talisman master and drawing indefinite talismans to protect himself, he had to have some different means to defeat the cultivators who were at the same state or even higher than himself. And this was also related to what Master Yen-sei said before leaving Chang'an City. At that time, Master Yen-sei looked at him and said calmly, "Even if you can fly your flying sword into the clouds and kill the enemy thousands of miles away, if the enemy can protect himself within 1 foot, this shocking sword will be meaningless. And even a guy like Liu Bai can only be dumbfounded once your second brother gets close to him. So managing the 1 foot in front of you is more important than anything else." The sword could fly thousands of miles away, but not even a foot in front of him. Ning Ke led the big black horse and stood quietly in the snow by the lake. He looked at the sky thousands of miles away and pulled out his blade to cut off a snowflake in front of him. "I spelled it out today. I will try to do it again tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 204. After Ning Ke left, the girls of the Great River Kingdom were still excitedly talking about what had happened. Cat Girl soaked her little feet in the hot spring and said happily, "Brother Zhong is indeed a disciple of the academy. No wonder he is so powerful." Zhuozhihua looked at her with a smile and said, "I had guessed it the first time we met. Otherwise, why did the Hill Master ask us to be so polite to him? If it were someone else, we would have driven him miles away." Then she sighed and said, "Fortunately, this senior brother of the academy showed up. I think those people in the Ueluan Kingdom and the Yen camp will behave themselves and won't send people to rob us." Cat Girl was thinking about some details of the battle. Her little feet tapped on the surface of the stream, and she raised her head slightly. She asked curiously, "Senior Brother Zhong didn't use any cultivation method to defeat that stinky monk. I didn't even feel any fluctuation of psyche power from him. Senior sister, is he a cultivator?" Zhuozhihua was startled and said, "I heard that there are no talented people in the academy this year. The strongest of the 6 in the course of magic skills, Mr. Xie, has only entered the no doubt state. Since senior brother Zhong didn't enter the course of magic skills, I guess he can't cultivate?" She said this hesitantly because she didn't believe that an ordinary student of the academy who couldn't cultivate could so easily defeat the monks of the White Tower Temple with his sword and arrows. In a quiet corner of the yellow cloth, the hot spring gathered and dispersed. The winter sun shone down from the treetops, gilding everything with a layer of dazzling halo. The black-haired girl in white seemed not to hear the conversation of the girls. She calmly held the brush and slowly wrote. As the tip of the brush moved, her beautiful hair slowly poured down her shoulders. Then, a letter from the Yen camp broke the happy silence of the mountain stream. Today, Ning Ke had embarked on a completely different path from ordinary cultivators. He always held himself to the principle of cultivation without the purpose of defeating the enemy is a waste of time, and constantly tried to learn in his daily cultivation life and combat practice. In a sense, although his state of cultivation was still ordinary, he could already be called a master, especially when facing ordinary cultivators. If he had accompanied Chao Xiaoshu to fight the Spring Breeze Pavilion, it would have been much easier to face the swordsmen of South Jin Kingdom and the monks of Yueluan Kingdom. If he had been asked to kill the sword master in the lakeside house in Chang'an City, he would not have been so badly injured. Of course, if he were to encounter those grand cultivators in the Knowing Destiny state, or powerhouses like Prince Long Qing or Wang Jinglu, no matter how fast his reaction was or how powerful his fighting style was, he would still be scared witless and fall to the ground, waiting to be beaten to death, no matter how fast his reaction was or how powerful his fighting style was. However, if Ning Ke really met such a powerhouse in the wilderness, he naturally had other means. Whether it was the talisman Taoism skills that he had never used in the battle, the brocade bag given to him by Master Yensei, or the primordial 13 arrows that gathered the collective wisdom of the back of the mountain of the academy, they would all be his means to save his life. With a calm and objective judgment of his own strength, he had a relatively accurate assessment of the danger of entering the wilderness. He was clear that it was impossible for him to forcibly snatch the tomes of arcane from the various powerhouses. However, it should not be a big problem to secretly watch or occasionally play some tricks to cause some trouble for Xiaohou. Hiding his identity and sneaking into the wilderness was good for sightseeing. If the situation suddenly changed and he really angered those unworldly sublime beings with a wave of their hands, he would be forced into a dead end where he could neither escape nor hide. At that time, he still had two last means to save his life. It was just that those two means were not known to outsiders. Your Excellency, you want to enter the wilderness alone? I swear to die rather than obey you. On the surface, he was the trusted lieutenant of the general's mansion, but in reality, he was the secret bodyguard of His Majesty. With an indignant and resolute expression on his face, he drew several small flowers with his shiny steel saber in front of him. Then, without hesitation, he put it on his own neck. If you want to leave me behind and enter the wilderness alone, then please step on my dead body and get out of this room. Ning Ke looked at the lieutenant who swore to die as if he was returning home, and shook his head helplessly. The Imperial Center Administration and the secret bodyguard were directly under the Imperial Palace, but there was no connection between them. Therefore, the lieutenant did not know his purpose of entering the wilderness. Ning Ke did not care much about the lieutenant's nervous attitude. He was more concerned about how he should enter the wilderness. It had to be safe and convenient for him to retreat. The best way was to break into the palace with thousands of Tang elite cavalries, cross the Hulun Sea and go straight to the desolate man's tribe. However, how could he find the tomes of arcane with thousands of elite cavalries? And how could he hide it from General Xiao? Riding into the wilderness alone seemed to be a rather heroic choice. However, although he believed that it would be easy for him to survive with his ability and familiarity with the wilderness, this choice was too obvious. It would be too easy for him to become the most obvious target. Riding a black horse with an arrow on his back and straight to the palace alone would obviously tell the spies of the judicial department of the Divine Hall in the wilderness and the informants of various forces that he was very powerful, confident, and narcissistic. Only the immortal sun was qualified to be so arrogant, confident, and narcissistic. If Ning-Ke were to rise on the grassland like a sun, he would attract everyone's attention in the shortest time possible, and then his identity would be found out. All forces knew that he represented the will of the Tang imperial court and the academy. Even if they did not come to kill him, they would have countless ways to trap him somewhere and make him unable to get in touch with what he wanted to get in touch with. The general's mansion of Tuyang City did this. Therefore, Ning-Ke was guarded by dozens of Tang elite soldiers and could only roam the frontier fortress all day long. At this moment, the lieutenant who was holding the saber on his neck and looking at him solemnly and resolutely did the same. Therefore, Ning-Ke could only frown and think of something else when he looked at him. "Tell me, what is the best way to enter the wilderness?" The lieutenant was stunned and showed a look of grief and indignation on his face. His saber was already on his neck, but His Excellency did not care at all and still insisted on entering the wilderness. Moreover, he even asked him for a way? Could it be that His Excellency would only look at him when his right hand trembled and the blade made a cut on his neck? Ning-Ke suddenly thought of the yellow cloth by the lake and stream, and his frown gradually relaxed. He looked up at the lieutenant who was still holding the saber on his neck and said, "I have something for you to do." Among the students of the academy who came to the frontier fortress for practice, there is a student named Zhong Dajuan. He is now in Trengshan camp, and I went there with you a few days ago. I want you to find a way to imprison him and not let him have any contact with the outside world. Also, you must do it secretly. Can you do it? The lieutenant held the saber and felt that his neck was a little stiff. He felt that his action was a little funny and answered in distress, "It should be no problem, but His Excellency." Ning-Ke waved his hand and did not listen to his advice. He said seriously, "Don't try to stop me in this way. I have never been afraid of dead people, not to mention those who seek death themselves." The lieutenant was disheartened and thought that it was really a great misfortune to have such a cold-hearted superior. Ning-Ke looked at his posture of holding the saber and said, "You are holding the saber with your right hand. If you want to commit suicide, shouldn't you turn the blade horizontally and place it on the right side of your neck?" Only then did the lieutenant realize that there was something wrong with his posture of holding the saber. He lowered his head in shame and ran out of the room with his hands covering his face. Ning-Ke shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He reached into his lapel and took out all the waste tokens after a long time. He wondered when he had become a doryman. He had a lot of trump cards and even more waste tokens. The ones given by the Academy, the Secret Guards, the Fish Dragon Gang, the Imperial Center Administration, and the ones given by Third Sister Yulian were piled densely on the table. They were made of wood, gold, stone, or neither. They were of different colors and luster. How can I make every waste token play its most important role? He looked at the waste token on the table and thought seriously. The waste token of the Secret Guards was useless on the grassland, but there must be spies of the Imperial Court in the Left King's Palace. He could use the waste token of the Imperial Center Administration to order them. If he was really forced, the waste token of the Academy would be thrown out like a magic weapon. Aunt Kunimati, who had a high status in the Yueluan kingdom, and Princess Luchinjia, who was famous for being infatuated, wanted a hot spring to soak in. It was not an unreasonable request. However, the hot spring had already been occupied by the female disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. Therefore, this request became unreasonable and caused a dispute, which led to more unreasonable things. They were all cultivators who came to help Yen under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom only sent ordinary disciples, and the Master of Calligrapher did not come. the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, was led by Aunt Chu. Moreover, the flower addict Lu Qingjia had a well-known relationship with Prince Long Qing of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. Therefore, both the Divine Hall and the Yen Kingdom had a clear attitude towards this dispute. Ning Ke defeated the monk of the White Tower Temple and temporarily protected the ownership of the hot spring for the girls of the Great River Kingdom. However, not long after that, an extremely difficult task fell on the group of girls. The countries of the Central Plains decided to negotiate with the left king's palace. In order to show their sincerity and show their benevolence and peace, the Divine Hall's Department of Light called on the countries to collect a batch of food and send it to the wilderness to help the people of the palace get through the winter. Even the most righteous idiot would not do such a stupid thing as keeping a tiger as a skewer. Therefore, the quantity of this batch of food could not be too large. It was only for symbolic purposes. Since it was symbolic, it naturally had to be sent to the palace before the midwinter. However, it was freezing cold and deep into the wilderness. They could encounter the horse gang at any time. It was difficult and dangerous, especially when the commander of the coalition army was only willing to send a small number of cavalries to escort the food. This task seemed even more terrifying. It was the girls of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom who accepted this task. The girls of the Great River Kingdom followed the cavalries to escort the food to the wilderness. Naturally, they could no longer occupy the beautiful hot spring by the lakeside. No matter what danger they would encounter on the way, it would be their own responsibility. Cat Girl said angrily, "This is too much. We should reprimand the Divine Hall." A female disciple said sadly, "This transfer order may have the intention of the Divine Hall." Cat Girl opened her eyes wide and did not understand her senior sister's words. How could the Hautian Taoist Divine Palace, which was sacred and righteous in the hearts of the believers in the world, do such a thing? Zhuo Zhihua said bitterly, "Prince Long Qing is the future emperor's son-in-law of the Yueluan Kingdom. Who do you think the Divine Hall will support?" Although there is no evidence, we can guess the reason for this transfer order. Aunt Chu of the Yueluan Kingdom has always been very vengeful. But senior brother Zhong is a student of the academy and he is in the Blue Water Battalion of the Dongxing Stockade Village. She can't do anything about it. Of course, she will vent her anger on us. Otherwise, how can she show her arrogance? The girls of the Great River Kingdom by the mountain stream thought of the danger they might encounter on the long journey and were very worried. They all looked at the black-haired girl sitting at the small table in the depths of the yellow cloth. "Hill Master, now that things have come to this, you must stand up and speak. In recent days, I have written it with the greatest perseverance and hard work. Day after day, I am afraid of tomorrow. If I really can't write it, I will tell everyone. If I can write it, I will not say it. I am grateful." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 205. What are you talking about? The black-haired girl didn't turn around. Her tone seemed to be much lower than that of a normal person, so she seemed to be unusually calm, or it could be said that she had no emotions at all. Zhuo Zhihua and Cat Girl looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. Zhuo Zhihua took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, "If the Divine Hall knows that Hill Master is here, they won't be so partial to Yueluan." The black-haired girl picked up the brush again and quietly wrote on the table. She said, "Since we have received the Divine Hall's edict to help Yen, it is natural for us to accept the military order and assign tasks. How can we be partial to them?" Zhuo Zhihua said anxiously, "The palace is deep in the wilderness. With us escorting the provisions, what should we do if we encounter horse gang, rogue soldiers, or even some malicious people?" The black-haired girl dipped the brush in the ink and said softly, "So what?" Zhuo Zhihua had been with her for many years at the foot of the mountain in the Black Ink Lake. Zhuo Zhihua knew that this was her character. She was not indifferent, but obsessed with books and ink. She didn't care about most things in the world. However, now the disciples of Black Ink Garden were facing a very dangerous situation. She was the only one who could save the situation, so she couldn't continue to be indifferent. Zhuozhihua clenched her fists slightly and looked at the black hair pouring down her back with a solemn expression. She said, "If Hill Master didn't show up, we might have died in the wilderness. You might have survived, but I would definitely die, and so would the Bobcat girl. Those shameless and insidious villains would be delighted by the news of our deaths. The Ueluan Kingdom, which has always wanted to oppress the people of the Great River Kingdom, might even celebrate." The black-haired girl beside the table slowly put the ink brush back on the inkstone. After a moment of silence, she put her hands into her sleeves and said calmly, "But why will we die?" Zhuozhihua heard that she was still as usual and became more anxious. She said with a bitter smile, "Because we are no match for the enemy." The black-haired girl said calmly, "If all the disciples of the Black Ink Garden are promoted to masters of the see-through realm, or if there is another grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state like you, who would dare to be so rude to us even if we go deep into the wilderness? Who would dare to frame us with such a ridiculous trick?" Zhuozhihua was stunned and didn't know what she meant by saying these words at this time. Because the disciples of Black Ink Garden are not strong enough, they will be bullied. Therefore, they will be afraid of this situation, afraid of death. If we are strong enough, we will not be afraid and will not be bullied. The black-haired girl's voice was as flat and smooth as the thin ice on the surface of a lake. If you want to become strong, you must have the courage to face the trials. Why did no one in the world dare to despise the Chang'an Academy? That's because their ordinary students also have to participate in the battlefield training and go to the most dangerous places to accept the test of life and death. When faced with difficult situations, don't always think of asking me to speak up. In the eyes of the world and all of you, perhaps I have an undeserved reputation, but you don't know that in this world, an undeserved reputation is the most powerless thing. Power always lies in power itself, just like how the brush and ink always lie in the brush and ink itself. Cat Girl stood beside Zhuozhihua and looked at the black-haired girl. She couldn't help but frown and ask, "Senior sister, your realm is already so high. Isn't it powerful enough?" The upper see-through state. It sounds really good. The black-haired girl said calmly, "Wang Jinglu of the Tang dynasty is known to be invincible below the knowing destiny state. Prince Longqing is only one step away from the knowing destiny state. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, even Prince Longqing is afraid of her. What is the upper see-through state?" These three people were the strongest in the young generation of the world. She mentioned them indifferently. Although she was warning her fellow disciples, she also revealed an aura that she was naturally qualified to be compared with these three people. Cat Girl listened to these words and stuck out her tongue. She said, "Senior sister, what you said is not reasonable. Even if these three people have a high state, they are just similar to you. If you want to say that they are more powerful, they are only grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. But the problem is that such grand cultivators are either great divine priests of the divine hall or peerless figures like Uncle Master who founded a sect. Ordinary people can't meet one in their lifetime. How can they be so easy to meet?" The little girl's words were right. Grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state were like divine dragons in the world. They were known but could not be met. They occasionally showed their faces in the clouds and instantly hid in the deep mountain courtyards. It was extremely difficult to meet them. However, if Ning Ke heard these words, it would be difficult for him to have any sympathy. He got along with them day and night and often consulted them, such as Second Brother who carried a wooden club, Pippi who fought with him for crab porridge, Master who stayed in the brothel every day, Chao Xiaoshu who floated far away, the Nation Master, younger brother of the Emperor, Professor Huang He, not to mention the headmaster of Academy and eldest brother whom he had not met yet. Grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. What was the difference between them and cabbages everywhere in the field? The black-haired girl had made up her mind. Although the girls of the Great River Kingdom still had many ideas in their minds, they had to keep them and began to prepare for departure. However, standing by the lake, looking at the distant wilderness which was more mysterious and dangerous than before, Zhuozhihua could not help but show a worried expression on her face. They came from the south of the mainland and had never been to the wilderness. Whether it was food, climate, geography or culture, they were all blank. The allied forces of Yan Kingdom had sent guides, but how could those guides be reliable? Who wouldn't be afraid of entering a completely unknown world without any reinforcements or sect backing them up? The young cat girl was more carefree. She was angry at the unfairness of the Divine Hall and the shamelessness of the people of the Yueluan Kingdom, but she was not afraid to enter the wilderness. She believed that as long as Senior Sister was there, no danger was dangerous. So she still had the leisure to remember the osmanthus cake of Lotus Restaurant in Chang and the knife light in the snow that day. She trotted along the lake all the way to find Ning Kei to say goodbye. Ning Kei listened to her talk about the situation faced by the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. He was silent for a moment and then looked at the blushing little girl and smiled. There were many emotions hidden in his gentle smile, such as, "Sure enough, I am so awesome," and so on. Cat Girl stared at him and suddenly said, "Senior brother, your smile is really scary." Ning Kei was stunned and asked, "Isn't it very gentle, sincere, kind and simple?" Cat Girl giggled. The silver bell rang by the lake and shook off a few snowflakes. Ning Kei looked at her and made his smile look more peaceful and casual. He then said calmly and casually, "It's really a coincidence that I also have something to do in the wilderness." Cat Girl's eyes brightened and looked at him and said, "Senior brother, you also want to go to the wilderness?" "Yes." Cat Girl exclaimed with admiration, "Alone? You are really great. I am very familiar with the wilderness." Ning Kei, who had succeeded in abducting the little girl with the osmanthus cake, smiled slightly and thought that he had been a guide when he left the wilderness last spring. It seemed that he still needed to be a guide when he returned to the wilderness this winter. Although he had guessed that the girls of the Great River Kingdom might be suppressed and ostracized, it was more of luck than analytical ability. Ning Kei was not an immortal who had ascended to heaven, so it was impossible for everything to go according to his plan. Cat Girl took him to the campsite of the Black Ink Garden and told Zhuozhihua about it. Zhuozhihua frowned slightly and looked at Ning Kei in confusion. She asked, "Senior brother Zhong, you are a disciple of the academy. It seems to be a little inconvenient. In the novel, if you were going somewhere to do something and suddenly met someone who wanted to go with you, then that person was either a bandit or a fugitive who was looking for someone to take the blame. As long as one had some experience and was not as naive and gullible as Cat Girl, they would feel that there must be some problems hidden in this coincidence. Because Ning Kei was a Tang person whom the Great River Kingdom was willing to get close to, and he was also a student of the academy, and these days he had become familiar with the girls of the Great River Kingdom by exchanging food with each other. That day he even killed the monks of the White Tower Temple to help them out of trouble. Zhuozhihua was not willing to associate him with any bad aspects, so she politely refused. Ning Kei asked, "Why is it inconvenient? Are you worried that the Divine Hall will be unhappy if they know that the Tang people have sneaked in?" Zhuozhihua slightly bowed her head, indicating that she acquiesced. Ning Kei smiled and said, "Then I will dress up as a disciple of the Black Ink Garden." He looked at the disciples of the Black Ink Garden, who were busy packing up not far away, and sighed in his heart that the master of calligrapher was so relieved to let such a group of inexperienced boys and girls come to the frontier fortress for experience. "Since we are sending grain to the wilderness, I think no one will check whether there is one more person in the team on the way. If my identity is exposed, well, I think the younger brothers and sisters of the Black Ink Garden should be trustworthy." His tone was calm and gentle, but with an irresistible force. This was the skill of words. He directly threw away the question of why he wanted to go and only talked about the problem of going with him, which was equivalent to leaving the basis of the discussion behind. Zhuo Zhihua was speechless and did not know how to answer. She thought that if she did not agree with this seemingly enthusiastic senior brother of the academy, her tone would inevitably be stiff and she might offend him. Ning Ke looked at her with a smile and said, "Any other questions?" At this moment, a calm and stiff voice came from behind the yellow cloth. "The question is why you want to go to the wilderness." The yellow cloth was lifted, and the girl in white slowly walked out. She had black hair and white clothes, and a wide blue cloth belt was tied around her waist, which made her dress more plain and clean. Ning Ke recognized that this was the girl who stood on the branch and looked at the lake in the morning. He did not say anything, but just smiled and bowed with hands folded in front. The girl in white had black hair casually draped over her shoulders, but not a trace of disorder. Under her long and slightly sparse eyelashes, her calm eyes were looking somewhere, as if there was no accurate focus, which made her look a little indifferent. Her white cheeks were slightly round, without any expression, and she seemed to be holding something in her mouth dully. Her thin red lips were pursed into a straight line. No matter in eyebrows, skin color or expression, this girl could not be called a stunning beauty. However, all of them were extremely beautiful. Ning Ke, who was as short of adjectives as someone, quietly looked at her and thought for a long time. He could only praise her beauty deep in his heart, but really could not find any more accurate words. The most eye-catching thing was her eyes, which did not drift, but no one knew where she was looking at, so she seemed a little dull and a little indifferent. It took Ning Ke a long time to take his eyes back from her eyes, and then he noticed more details. There was a cute pink hairpin in the girl's black hair. Because of the cold weather, the tip of her nose was slightly red. This inexplicable cuteness finally diluted the dull indifference. He repeated the girl's question, "Why do you want to go to the wilderness?" The girl in white looked at him, but also seemed to be looking at the tree behind him, waiting silently. Ning Ke was a little unhappy by some disdain that might be hidden in her eyes and said, "Why do I want to go? Because I am too bored staying in Dongxing Stockade Village. How about this reason?" This was obviously said in a fit of pique. The white-clothed girl did not get angry. She continued to stare at him, or at the tree behind him. Ning Ke suddenly felt that in this world, besides Sang Sang, there seemed to be another woman who could defeat him. He could not help but shake his head helplessly and laughed at himself. Of course, this is not a good excuse. I admit this, but I believe that you should also believe that I will not harm you. I am familiar with the wilderness. If I go with you, it will bring you a certain degree of convenience. You help to cover up my identity, which is exactly what I need. So this is a win-win choice. The girl in white finally said the second sentence, but it was essentially no different from the first sentence. "Why?" Ning Ke said gently. "Our two countries have been on good terms for generations, so it is natural for the Academy and the Black Ink Garden to join hands." The girl's third sentence should be the same question, and there was no change in her expression or tone. "Why?" Ning Ke looked at her for a long time, and finally gave up. He used his eyes to indicate Zhuo Zhihua to take Cat Girl away. When there were only two of them on the spot, he seriously explained, "The Divine Hall is interested in the wilderness and the desolate man, and the Tang Empire is also interested in these. In this matter, the Academy should make its own voice." The girl asked expressionlessly, "Then why do you hide your identity?" Ning Ke helplessly explained, "Because the Academy just wants to take a look. Besides, I am a golden secret agent of the Imperial Court. Secret agents, of course, have to do things in secret." The second half of the sentence was obviously nonsense, but for some reason, it seemed that this nonsense made the girl in white believe his words. Her slender and slightly sparse eyelashes fluttered, and she continued to ask, "What benefits do we have? I represent the Academy. Whether it is the Divine Hall or the Ueluan Kingdom, if they want to bully you, they will more or less have scruples. The girl slowly shook her head and said, if you hide your identity, there will be no scruples. After thinking for a moment, Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, if we are really in a desperate situation, I will naturally not continue to hide my identity. I believe that with the self-esteem of the Black Ink Garden, they will only need my help at that time. The girl slowly moved her eyes away, looking at the trees by the lake or the thin ice on the lake, and said, why should I trust you? Ning Ke answered, the academy is trustworthy. The girl turned back, quietly looked at his chest, and said, okay. How should I address you, girl? Emo Shanshan. Emo Shanshan from Mogan Mountain. Ning Ke thought that the mountain behind the Black Ink Garden was called Mogan Mountain? If the ink was dry, how could the master of calligrapher, Lord Wang, write? Wouldn't the famous calligraphy addict cry? Academy Zhong. For some reason, he did not want the name Zhong Dajuan to come out from the thin lips of the girl in white. He added, I am the 13th, you can call me 13. The girl Emo Shanshan took a step forward, very close to him, and slightly squinted at his face. Ning Ke looked at the beautiful little face close to him, and felt very embarrassed. Looking at the slightest expression of the other party, he was sure that he really did not know who he was. The girl Emo Shanshan nodded, patted his shoulder like an elder, and then turned to leave. He did not know whether she was satisfied or not. There are many first times in this book, Jiang Yi. This chapter is the first time that I try to describe the appearance of a character directly and intuitively. My ability to describe people and things has always been extremely poor. This time I stole a trick, so it is not difficult. I will try to do this more in the future. Finally, today I write it again. Long sigh, please vote for me, we are still first. We are very awesome, the more awesome we are, the better. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 206. Emo Shanshan was both satisfied and dissatisfied. She was satisfied that Ning Ke didn't know her. Then there would be less noise and trouble. She was dissatisfied that Ning Ke didn't know her, so she had to overturn some of her original ideas. Because of some conflicting feelings, she didn't know what to say. She had to imitate her master's usual behavior, gently patting his shoulder, and then turned away. Looking at her back, Ning Ke thought that this girl from Black Ink Garden was really proud and indifferent to the extreme. Noticing his expression, Cat Girl was worried that he would misunderstand her senior sister and be unhappy. However, it was not convenient for her to explain for her senior sister, so she could only snort angrily and leave. I don't doubt senior brother Zhong's identity as a student of the academy. The other party is from the Chang an academy, so there should be no problem. But senior brother Zhong is a Tang. He has countless ways to enter the wilderness. He can go with the Yen army or the Tang imperial court's envoy. But he has to hide his identity and follow us into the wilderness. Zhuo Zhihua looked at Emo Shanshan beside her by the fire at night. She slightly frowned and said in a low voice, no matter how he explained to you before, and how many shadows of the Tang imperial court and the academy are behind this, it must be a big deal. The Great River Kingdom is weak, and I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to get out of such a big deal. Cat Girl shook her head and said, what are you afraid of? It must be good to go into the wilderness with the academy. Even if it will bring us trouble, we have the same amulet. Zhuo Zhihua smiled helplessly and rubbed the girl's head. She thought that although the two countries had been on good terms for generations, if it was really a dispute between the Tang Empire and the Divine Hall as she imagined, the amulet might become a fatal amulet. Emo Shanshan, who had been listening quietly, said at this time, let him follow my carriage. Hearing this, Cat Girl gently clapped her hands and smiled. She looked at Zhuo Zhihua and comforted her. Senior sister, what are you afraid of? Even if senior brother Zhong is a master of the second floor of the academy, he won't mess around, right? Emo Shanshan said softly, He is not a student of the second floor. It's really a pity. Catgirl asked in surprise, Senior sister, how do you know? Emo Shanshan looked at the dancing flames on the fire and seemed to be looking further away. She said, if he is a student of the second floor of the academy, how can he not know my name? That captain had once questioned how Ning Ke, as a student of the second floor, did not know the secret of the 7 tomes of arcane. Now Emo Shanshan had also expelled him from the second floor of the academy because of his ignorance. If Ning Ke knew this, he would probably be depressed that he only knew how to cultivate in the back mountain of the academy and forgot to ask about these things. The next day, Ning Ke rode the big black horse to the bank of the Blue Lake. The heavy luggage was placed on both sides of the horse's back, making the big black horse shake its head and breathe out hot air. It seemed extremely dissatisfied, but it did not seem to be exhausted. He changed into an ordinary disciple's uniform of black inked garden and put on a bamboo hat to cover most of his face. Ning Ke was still not satisfied, so he took out the mask that Sang Sang sewed by herself from his luggage and put it on carefully. Emo Shanshan walked out from behind the yellow cloth. Today she did not wear the plain white dress, nor did she wear the wide blue belt around her waist. Like other girls from the Great River Kingdom, she wore a plain wide skirt and a bamboo hat with a veil hanging on the top of her head. Her beautiful eyebrows and eyes were all hidden behind the veil and could not be seen clearly. Both of them wished they could change their faces and make themselves the most inconspicuous. However, they had seen each other's true faces, so they suddenly found that the other had the same idea as them. They could not help but feel a little strange. The two looked at each other and did not speak. Then they brushed past each other. At that moment, Ning Ke noticed that the girl's gaze hidden behind the veil did not completely fall on him. He could not help but frown, thinking that she actually wanted to show her disdain to him through the veil. He snorted in his heart and thought that even Prince Long Qing was not his opponent in pretending to be lonely and indifferent. You are such a good young girl, don't even think of using this kind of gaze to hit me. After the disciples of Black Ink Garden finished organizing their troops, they marched towards the east and came to the side of the coalition camp. From the logistics department, they received the rations from the Central Plains to assist the left king's palace. The people of the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Yueluan Kingdom were very clear that the real difficulties and dangers would appear after entering the wilderness. Therefore, they did not encounter any twists and turns or any difficulties. 200 yen cavalries, more than 100 civilian workers who were driving the carriages, and a dozen disciples of Black Ink Garden from the Great River Kingdom left the frontier fortress in such a simple manner. Accompanied by the winter wind and the fake morning sun, they walked into the cold and vast wilderness. The yen cavalries escorting the grain team moved forward silently. The civilian workers who were driving the grain carriages looked uneasy or numb. The disciples of Black Ink Garden spread out to guard the surroundings. Other than the grain carriages, there were also 2 horse carriages that belonged to Black Ink Garden. Emo Shanshan was in one of the carriages, while Ning Ke rode on the big black horse and followed closely behind. After traveling for more than 10 miles, the military camp behind them had long disappeared. He took off the conical hat on his head and looked at the snow that had accumulated in the withered yellow grass. Hearing the shrill cry of an eagle that came from somewhere, his eyes that were exposed outside the mask had a gleam of joy. He had not seen such a familiar scenery for a long time. Even the slight pain caused by the cold air entering his lungs made him feel as if he had returned home. For the next few days there was nothing much to be done. The troop that was moving slowly on the wilderness could also drag out a large amount of dry dust. It was quite imposing. They did not encounter any blind horse bandits or wandering soldiers, nor did they encounter any strange things. Since the Divine Hall had assigned such a difficult task to the Black Ink Garden, they had intended to make things difficult for them. On the surface, they had done it well. The highest authority of the grain delivery team was also given to the Black Ink Garden. The 200 yen cavalries and grain wagons had to listen to the orders of these girls. When Commander Ning Kei came to the side of the horse carriage and said a few words to Mo Shanshan through the window, the originally arranged Yen army guide was officially laid off. The route of the troops, the choice of camp, and the arrangement of time were all decided by him. Under his command, the troops walked strictly along the surrounding hills of the Kidney Sea. Even though they could not find water every day, at least they could ensure an adequate supply of firewood. The troops set up camp very early every day. Just after noon, Ning Kei requested to find a campsite and began to prepare to rest. The leader of the Yen cavalries once raised an objection. He thought that the distance they traveled each day was too short. According to the current speed, it would be too late by the time the grain team reached the palace. It was not a big deal if the tribes and herdsmen starved to death, but if it affected the negotiation between the Divine Hall and the palace, it would be a real problem. The girls from the Great River Kingdom did not care about the leader's objection. In their opinion, since the Hill Master had decided to let the senior brother of the academy take charge, they should just listen to him. There was no need to say so much. As long as they could enter the wilderness safely and return happily, they did not care whether the Divine Hall would be angry or not. Even though it was winter in the wilderness, it was not too cold yet. The withered grass, barnyard branches, and snow along the way looked boring, but to these girls from the south, it was still a fresh journey. Even though Ning Kei had never been to the wilderness east of Min Mountain, this kind of scenery and this kind of journey were not fresh at all. He had done it countless times, such as giving directions, setting up camp, feeling the wind direction, and looking at animal dung. Most of the time, he rode the big black horse slowly and freely. The big black horse's bridle was specially made, so it could freely lower its head and nibble the grass while walking. His body and soul were also specially made. In this silent and boring journey, he calmly felt the cold heaven and earth, looking for the inspiration to break the realm. Occasionally, he would take Cat Girl to shoot a few gazelles, improving the lives of others. What a beautiful winter scenery of the wilderness! What a beautiful sightseeing trip in the wilderness! Before and after Ning Kei entered the wilderness disguised as a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, there were many powerhouses from the Central Plains who entered this mysterious and difficult territory. Among these powerhouses, there were powerhouses from the border army of the Tang Empire, monks from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, men from the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, and executioners from the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall who were known for being cold-blooded and serious. Prince Long Qing was naturally the best of these powerhouses. At this moment, no one knew where he was standing in the wilderness, what scenery he was looking at, and what kind of thoughts he was thinking about. But not many people knew that the real ruler of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall, the powerhouse who suppressed Prince Long Qing to the point that he could hardly breathe, had already received the order of the great divine priest of judgment and entered the wilderness alone a few months ago. As the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, who was recognized as the most diligent and powerful among the 3 addicts in the world, was now standing on the top of a meadow outside the white cloth of the left king's palace, looking at the night sky in the north with no expression. No one knew what she was thinking at this time, but it must be that she disdained to think about the whereabouts of Prince Long Qing and his subordinates. Let's go back a few months to the scene when she just left the Peach Mountain of West Hill. Her red dress floated out of the magnificent Taoism temple like a gorgeous cloud of fire. The great divine priest of judgment sat indifferently on the throne carved from the whole piece of South Sea black jade. He slowly moved his eyes back from the bead curtain, closed his eyes, and whispered, "How is the great divine priest of light now?" The priest, standing respectfully below the throne, heard the words, "Great divine priest of light," and his body suddenly stiffened. He lowered his head and replied, "As usual, he recites the doctrines and classics every day. It seems there is nothing unusual." The Peach Mountain of West Hill was also known as the Divine Mountain. On the south side of the mountain facing the sun, thousands of pink peach trees bloomed. The Taoism temple hidden between the peach trees grew higher and higher, appearing extremely magnificent and solemn. On the other side of the mountain was a precipitous cliff. The smooth boulder looked as if it had been carved out by a god. There were almost no cracks or soil. Not to mention peach blossoms, even a weed could not survive on it. Even weeds with the most stubborn vitality could not stand firm on the rock walls, but humans could. Countless years ago, the most devout believers of Haotian Taoism, under the inspiration of fanatical worship, used the most primitive tools and the most primitive methods, and forcibly dug dozens of steep stone paths through the cliff with their own hands. In the process of building these stone paths, countless people fell off the cliff, and their corpses were hard to find. But in the end, the believers still did what they wanted to do. This was probably the real reason why human beings were superior to all things in the world. The middle-aged priest walked slowly on the steep stone path. The huge cliff seemed to be like the collapse of the sky. It seemed to give people a huge pressure. Even in front of the throne of the great divine priest of judgment, he could still stand a little straight, but he completely bent down on the stone path, almost like an ant crawling on the stone path. Walking along the steep stone path along the huge zigzag for a long time, the middle-aged priest finally walked to the depths of the cliff behind the Peach Mountain. This place had been surrounded by clouds all day long. There was no sunlight all day long, and it was difficult to see 5 fingers. He could only feel the wetness around him and the sound of water coming from somewhere. There was a door in the depths of the fog. The middle-aged priest stood in front of the door silently for a moment, and then pushed the door open and entered. Behind the door was a gloomy world. A faint smell of blood reverberated in the dry passage. The dim yellow light shone on the iron wall, adding a strange and heavy feeling to the complicated and beautiful fu lines on the wall. This was the Yu prison, a place that millions of Haotian believers had never heard of. This place was responsible for detaining the remnants of the devil's doctrine and sinners who were judged as heretics by the West Hill Divine Palace. Only those sinners who were so sinful that even burning could not cleanse their filth were qualified to be locked up here. Haotian Taoism had been established on the Peach Mountain for many years. In this long time, none of the sinners who were locked up in the Yu prison had ever been able to escape. This was because those who were powerful enough to escape from the Yu prison would not be captured alive by the Divine Hall. If they could not escape, they would never be able to escape. They could only live in the darkness and isolation from Haotian, painfully and helplessly for the rest of their lives. The middle-aged priest walked silently in the dim passage with his head down. He walked for a long time, but the passage seemed endless. It was not until the passage seemed to pass through the entire holy mountain that a wooden fence appeared. This wooden fence looked ordinary and was not made of any precious wood. There was no fu written by a divine talisman master on it. The gap between the wooden bars was very wide, wide enough for a person to walk out. However, it was precisely this wooden fence that imprisoned a certain someone for 14 years. The middle-aged priest lifted his robe and knelt in front of the wooden fence. He kowtowed 3 times to the old man with withered hair behind the fence, and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, great divine priest." The old man behind the fence was reading a Haotian scripture in his hand. He turned around when he heard the voice. The old man's cheeks were very thin, and his expression was peaceful and peaceful. His deep eye sockets were enshrouded with holy light. The light was so peaceful and pure, without any impurities or filth. It was as if it could see through everything in the world and see the darkness between the appearance and the heart of everyone. It was incomparably bright. I don't know if I have time to write it tomorrow. If there is no annual leave announcement, I will try to write one more chapter before I go home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.